Hello everyone to this book reading. Hopefully this will be the final one of this book. So here we go. Chapter 36. It wasn't long before I made the connection. I was in the office the following morning, walking back from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. I'd offered to make one for Hayley in the hope that we might then strike up a conversation. One that would encourage her to reveal what she'd seen or not seen the previous night. Had she seen me and Dan and Maddie's garden? I thought she had, but I couldn't be sure. Had she mentioned anything to Dan when he'd answered the door for her? And if so, had he made an excuse for my presence that I didn't even know yet? If only he were here, we'd be able to confer, get our story straight, but it was nearly lunchtime and still hadn't got in. I stopped outside his room and glanced in through the door, which was slightly ajar. His chair was still tucked in neatly behind his desk. I scanned the desk for his laptop, but it was empty. Save for the usual clutter, a pen holder full of pens, a small desk fan, a thick black leather bound diary, the inevitable family photograph. My eyes shifted to the silver framed snapshot of a smiling Maddie and a teenager girl with cold ringed eyes and long blonde hair. Emily, I presumed. I squinted to get a better look at her, and that's when I remembered what Maddie told me. We think she's seen someone older than her. We never found out who he was. No one seemed to be looking my way, so I nudged the door open wider with my foot and stepped inside, inching closer to Dan's desk, still clutching the hot mugs of coffee, holding them steady so that I didn't splash any liquid onto the deep plush carpet under my feet. My throat tightened as I got a better look at the photograph. Maddie, all lit up and laughing, taken pre-diagnose, no doubt. She was leaning in lovingly towards her daughter, whose own smile, in contrast, was tight and tolerant. Emily had the paradoxical air and both belligerence and extreme vulnerability that many adolescents seem to project. She was pretty, shockingly pretty. Big blue eyes with long dark lashes, a dainty upturned nose, full lips, and thick, shiny hair. Young men would definitely look twice, but she was only 15, and Maddie was dying. Maddie was soon going to leave her teenager daughter without a mother. Tears sprang to my eyes as I thought about Josh and how Fern might feel if she knew that she was going to die and leave him behind. She would be petrified of leaving Josh alone in the world. Well, not alone. He'd have his dad, of course, but she'd want to be certain before she died that all her affairs were in order, that her husband was free from worry, that Josh was okay and safe from harm. A lump rose to my throat as I imagined myself promising Fern on her deathbed that I would look after Josh for her. But who would look out for Maddie's daughter? Dan would have to continue to keep a roof over their heads, and he worked long hours. Would Jerry be supportive of him? I wondered. Jerry was more than Dan's boss. He was a friend of the family. That's what Maddie had told me. They've been to our house and met Emily numerous times. And then the thought struck me so suddenly I felt I'd been punched. Jerry Seeger. What if Jerry Seeger was the older man Emily had been seeing? What if Jerry Seeger had been grooming Emily for sex, just as he groomed Helen and me? The thought was chilling, sickening. Maddie had said that Emily's relationship with this older man was over, but was it really? From what I knew of Jerry, he wouldn't give up until he'd got what he wanted. And a beautiful young girl like Emily would be exactly what he wanted. I made myself breathe deeply and evenly, then turned and slipped out of the room. For a split second, I noticed Hayley watching me, but she quickly averted her eyes and tilted her head back towards to see her computer screen, making a play of being engrossed in her work. When I walked over and placed her coffee mug on the desk, she looked up blankly, feigning surprise at me standing there. But then her eyes moved to my bare arms, and I realised what she was looking at. I felt myself flush. My skin was lightly scratched from a hideout in the bushes. I knew the marks were visible, but although we'd had some rain overnight, it was still too warm and muggy to put a cardigan on. My cat, I said. I had to warm her. She hates it. She always scratches me. Haley's forehead creased, and she looked at her coffee as if she wasn't sure whether to drink it or not. I've washed my hands since then, don't worry, I told her. Oh, yeah, she said awkwardly. I wasn't thinking that. She reached out for the coffee cup and took a tentative sip. Do you know where Dan is? I asked her, as casually as I could. He's working from home today. I took a mouthful of coffee. I need him to sign something. I said, have you got his mobile number? Sorry, I'm not allowed to give it out. What do you need signed? Oh, just my timesheet from the agency. I can sign those. Can you? Yeah, she smiled. No problem. Okay, I said, I'll dig it out. Are you okay, then, after yesterday? Yeah, I said. I think it was just the heat. Her brows drew together. Should you be here? I'm okay. The ambulance was just a precaution. They said my blood pressure was low and I do faint sometimes. It's happened before. Well, don't do anything too strenuous. She flashed me a weak smile. I thanked her and went back to my desk. I set about translating a letter to one of the Paris St. George's directors, which Dan had asked me to have a go at. It was my least favourite way of translating, from English into French. The vocabulary was complex and specialised, and I found myself looking up every other word. After I've constructed a few very amateur sentences, I found myself staring at my computer, thinking instead about Emily and Jerry. I knew my hunch was a strong one, but there was no way I could dump all of this on Maddie until I was certain. So I opened up my browser on my computer and typed Emily's name into the search engine. I scanned the first page of results. She'd kept her social media profiles private, sensible girl, but it didn't take long to me find out what school she went to, thanks to a school newsletter, unintentionally published, no doubt, naming her as one of her several students to have been invited to have hot chocolate with her with the head. The newsletter was 2 years old, but the school catchment area took in Dan and Maddie Street. There was no accompanying photo, but the name Emily Blakely, not usual, but not that common either, and the location of the school both told me that this was her. At some point before lunch, Haley went out to run an errand for Dan. My Google search had brought up nothing else, so I stood up and pulled my bag over my shoulder and strode purposefully from the room. When I got to Dan's office, though, I slowed my pace and looked cautiously to my left and right. A couple of heads were bowed over paper files. 2 or 3 of my colleagues were talking in a small kitchen. Others were sitting silently at their desk and staring at their screens. No one appeared to be paying any attention to me. I slid into Dan's room and rooted around inside my bag for my phone for a moment before realising, with annoyance, that I'd left it in the key desk drawer. I had no camera, but it didn't matter. I quickly picked up the silver-framed photograph. Dan wouldn't miss it, not today. My eyes then landed on the black leather desk diary. I picked that up too and slid it into my bag, along with the photograph. Checking that the coast was clear, I slipped out of the room again, went back to my desk, took my phone out of my drawer, then told one of the secretaries that I had an hospital appointment, which I'd already cleared with Haley. I fired off a quick email to Haley to tell her that I wasn't feeling that well after all and was going to the doctor. I had a little time to play before the school day ended, and so I walked to London Bridge and caught the bus north to Instalment. I got off the angle and walked west towards Emily's school. I stood behind a car a few feet back from the gates. I wasn't completely confident about being able to identify Emily amongst hundreds of identically dressed teenage girls, but it didn't matter. This was just a practice run. I knew she wasn't going to Jerry, not this time. Our students began to filter out into small groups, heads bowed together, talking quietly and laughing and shouting to one another, jostling and pushing. I took one last look at the photo and slipped it back into my bag. I studied each group of females one by one, immediately filtering out anyone who wasn't Emily before turning my attention to the next group. And then I saw her. She was with another shorter, stockier girl with a neat brow bob. They were on their phones, walking side by side, occasionally glancing up and watching the disdain as a school bag got thrown into the road or a football bounced or someone screamed or was slide tackled. They walked in the direction of Upper Street and turned the corner and headed north towards Instant Green. I crossed the road and walked in the opposite direction for a moment before turning around and following her home. Chapter 37, sorry. Wait, Sarah says. How did you know that she wasn't going to him? I smile a little proudly. I had Dan's diary, didn't I? I knew where he was, and he and Jerry were very often in conference together. So I made a note of all the board meetings and all the direction lunches they were going to, and after that I made sure I always had one eye on the door to his office. If Jerry left early for any reason I didn't know about, I'd phone Helen, who was on standby. And Helen would follow him? I shook my head. Not him. It was easier to track Emily. Safer too. As soon as I left the office, I'd phone Helen. She'd had my car, she needed it for her job, so I let her use it. She'd invent a last-minute house viewing or say that a genuine one had taken longer, so I would phone her and she would hotfoot it to the school or to Maddie's house, depending on what time it was. She'd wait for Emily and follow her. Emily had a fairly regular pattern. She usually went to the shops on Union Road, to Rosie's house or home. When I finished work, I'd go meet Helen wherever she was and we'd stake Emily out for the rest of the evening until we were confident that she'd gone to bed. Her bedroom was at the foot of the house, so you could see the lights go off. Once she stayed at Rosie's house a few times. At the weekend, we lost her, but mostly she was home. Sarah nods. And Emily didn't know Helen, of course, or me. And she didn't know your car? No, I agree. So even if she did notice us, it was unlikely she'd pay us much attention, or think anything of it. And we were very careful. We always kept our distance, and kept the lights off in the car. Besides, I know that if I was right about this, if you were going to see her and Jerry together, it was going to happen before too long. And it did. Sarah screwed me, waiting, right? I nod. He hasn't changed. He's still the same filthy pervert he's always been. My voice breaks with emotion as I speak about him the way I should have always done. With anger, with contempt, with the disgust and repulsion that I'd swallowed the whole when I was too young to know that it belonged to him instead of to me. And you told Maddie? Yes. How did she take it? I sigh, my heart heavy at the memory, as you'd expected. I say, except? Sarah raised her eyebrows. Except, I say, her idea of how to stop him was way, way better than mine. It was tragic, it was scary, but it was the best. Chapter 38. September had arrived, and the weather had cooled. Maddie's back garden was a mixed plate of forest green, lime, and faded yellow where the grass had been scorched by the sun. The garden furniture on the patio had been tucked away for the winter inside thick canvas hoods. Helen and I sat awkwardly side by side at a table in the kitchen while Maddie made a pot of coffee and, when it was ready, splashed it into our waiting cups. I noticed how clumsy she did this, how she struggled to fit the jug back onto the hot plate. Her hands trembled as she walked over with the coffee mugs and placed them on the table in front of us. I wasn't sure if this was the shock of what we've just told her or the effect of her illness, but seeing her looking this vulnerable was making me feel like a real bitch for what we'd done. In the end, it had been Helen who had witnessed it. Helen who had the evidence on her phone. Maddie would no doubt want to hear it from her, we decided, and I'd expected some resistance and some disbelief and denial. At first, that's what I thought we were dealing with when Maddie had taken the phone from Helen and stared at the video. But Jerry doesn't have a van, she murmured. Where would he get a van from? Why would he have a van? Maybe he hired it, I suggested. Maddie had lifted her dazed eyes to meet mine. She looked as though she had been slapped. I'm so sorry, I'd said. The last time I felt this way was when I told a friend at drama school, the first real friend I'd had after Helen, that her boyfriend was cheating on her. Her reaction was to blame me, as if I was enjoying what I'd just told her, and she'd never spoken to me again. I vowed after that to stay out of other people's business, but this was very different. How could we not tell Maddie what was happening to her daughter? What other choice did we have? Maddie slid into her seat and fixed her eyes on the coffee cup. How did you know him? I saw Emily with him. Helen answered her, looking confused. She nodded at her phone. I didn't mean that. She turned to Emily. I mean, how did you know to follow them? How did you know that this was happening? Helen and I looked at each other. Helen gave an almost unpredictable nod. Because he did it to us. My heart thudded like a drum as I spoke the words out loud. For a moment, Maddie seemed unable to grasp this. He did it to you. I swallowed. I could feel Helen stiffen beside me. When we were the same age as Emily, he had sex with us both. Not together, I added quickly. Helen first, and then me. And then I told her everything. How he cheated his way out of our lives. How he cheated his way into our lives. He'd befriended us and charmed us and made us feel like grown-ups. How he'd bought us sweets and drinks and vodka and romanced us with music, and when we were giddy with love and tipsy on alcohol, how he'd guilt-trip us into having sex with him on a mattress in the back of his van. Maddie's eyes grew wider and wider as I spoke, and then she clapped her mouths together. Excuse me, she mumbled. Her chair screeched back and she ran into the kitchen, her hip colliding in it with a kitchen unit as she went. We could hear the door to the downstairs cloakroom in the hallway slam shut, then the loud voice of vomiting. Do you think we should go and see if she's all right? Helen asked. I got up and went into the hallway, and Helen followed me. Maddie, I called through the closed door in the cloakroom. Are you okay? Can we get you anything? There was no answer for a moment. Finally, the door opened and Maddie stepped outside, looking pale and gaunt. It's okay, she said, wiping her mouth. I'll be all right in a second. She walked carefully back into the kitchen, with us following, and collapsed into the armchair by the window. I like the idea of coffee, she murmured, but I can't seem to stomach it anymore. It's probably the shock, too. Can I get you some water? I asked. She nodded, and so I fetched a glass from the cupboard, filled it at the kitchen tap, and handed it to Maddie, then sank onto the bar stool at the kitchen counter. Helen pulled out a stool and sat down next to me. Maddie slowly sipped from the glass and breathed several long, deep breaths. Then she placed the glass on the coffee table beside her, swallowed hard, and looked from Helen to me. So, did you tell anyone? About what you did? She nodded. At the time, no, I said. For years I tried to think about him. For years I tried not to think about him. And then I met up with Helen again. I looked at Helen, who said in a tiny voice, We blamed ourselves, you see. Maddie gave a gulping sound. Until we talked about it, I said. And that's when we decided to do something. You went to the police. Helen did. But they said they couldn't do anything. I told her the reason why. But, Maddie sniffed, all those cases, I mean, Max Clifford, that was different, I said. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want him to do it. He just did it. But we consented. We were, I swallowed, hating the word, willing. So with us, it wasn't rape. Wasn't even indecent assault. It was underage sex. The only sexual offence with a time limit. I added bitterly. Maddie looked thoughtfully back at me, and then her expressions changed. And so that's why you're working at the bank? I nodded. You got a job there? On purpose? Yeah, I wanted to expose him. Dig a bit first, perhaps. Find something out. And now you have, she said flatly. I'm sorry, I said again. Don't be. She gave a thin smile. I'm glad you did what you did. I straightened up on my stool. So, will you go to the police? Maddie's expression was one of bewilderment, as if she hadn't considered this. The law changed now, I said, talking quickly. Well, I'm sure you know that. He can get up to 14 years in prison. This time, they'll take it seriously. She laid her head back against the chair, her words blurring a little as she murmured, We'd have to be able to prove it, though. We'd have to have evidence. We have evidence, I said, confused, on Helen's phone. You have evidence of a hug, of Emily getting into a van with him, but that's all. It could be innocent. I thought for a moment. We need to get Emily on board, obviously. And what if she isn't on board? Well, I said, floundering a little, I guess you'll want to talk to her first. Maddie turned her head and looked out to the garden. Do you believe he's abusing her? I pressed her. Or trying to, Helen said kindly. Maddie looked from Helen to me. I don't believe it, she said, her voice quivering. I know it. But he's manipulated her, hasn't he? She'll protect him, she'll lie for him, she won't turn on him. I frowned. Do you know that for sure? Maddie put her head in her hands and waited. No, she said finally. But we've been here before. Before? A few months ago, I told you she was seeing someone too old for her. We found messages between them on her phone. You read them? I said eagerly. What did they say? That she was special, that she was amazing. She gulped, fighting back tears again. That when she was 16, they'd be together. Helen and I looked at each other. And that they'd go somewhere, just two of them, somewhere where no one will know him. I saw Helen bite her lip. It had to be Jerry. And what did Emily say? She lied, Maddie said. She lied about everything. Her eyes flickered around the kitchen, as if seeing it for the very first time. To think, she said, to think that I had him in my house. To think that her voice shook, cooked food for him, poured wine for him, all this time. She started sobbing, then really sobbing. I just can't. I just can't. I crouched down beside her, put my arms around her, and held her while she cried. After she stopped shaking, I let go of her. Why don't you just call the police? I said soothingly. Let them deal with it. Let them gather the evidence. Gather the evidence? Maddie lifted her head, her eyes wide. You're talking about it like it was going to be some big investigation, but it's Emily, just Emily. You have the phone number, the messages. That wasn't Jerry's real phone number, she cried out. Why would he use his registered phone number? Oh, I said, realising. Without Emily, they won't be able to prove the thing. And even if she does agree to talk to them, it's going to be... She shook her head. Horrendous. That's true, Helen chipped in. I glanced up at Helen, frowning. Well, she'll have to go through what I did, won't she? She said, all those humiliating questions. But for a reason, I said. It will go somewhere this time. Yeah, Maddie huffed. To a courtroom, where she'll get asked all the same humiliating questions before some clever lawyer rips her to shreds. It'll be all turned into a long, drawn-out, bloody nightmare. And what if it's too late by then? Too late for what? But I'd realised what she had meant as soon as I said it. Her eyes sparkled with desperation, with rage. I'm dying, Tate, she wailed, the agony inside her spilling out like blood. Do you think this is how I want to spend my final weeks or months with my family? With police and lawyers and social workers coming in and out of the house? going to court hearings and seeing him watching us, and not just him. All of our nosy neighbours, all the school mums sitting in the public gallery, coming home and watching Emily eaten up inside with the hurt and the guilt and the shame of what she's done. What she's done? Don't you mean what he's done? But she'll blame herself, won't she? Maddie flung her arms up, like you did. And that's assuming she even realises there's a blame to be had. But even if she does, when she does, we're still going to be a million miles away from him being locked up for this. It could take months and months, even years, for it to go to trial. I might not even live long enough to see my daughter through the. She let out a sob. To the end. I felt awful. In an instant, I saw it from her point of view. God, Maddie, I'm sorry. I've been so insensitive. There'll be no way back, she whispered. Once we start this, there'll be no way back. I need time to think. I need to work out how to handle this. Of course, I said. Of course you do. Helen leaned forward. We're here for you. We really are. I agreed. Every step of the way. We'll support you, whatever you decide to do. Maddie nodded, then closed her eyes and leaned back against her seat again. Sorry, she murmured. I have to rest my head a minute. We waited, but she didn't move a muscle. Just lay still, her head tilted up at the ceiling, her eyes shut. After a few minutes, Helen looked at me and whispered, Is she asleep? Should we go? Maddie lifted her head, then, and looked directly at Helen. Tears fell down her cheeks as she stuttered and stumbled over her words. I just don't think I'm going to have that long. Chapter 39. The alarm going off sounded like a train whistle blowing in Maddie's ear. She reached out and pressed the switch to silence it, and instantly felt her stomach rise up. She was coming to expect it now, the nausea. For the last 3 mornings it had been there before she had even woken up. Stirring inside her like an omen, the association it brought with it, making her heart sink to its bottommost depth. The last time she'd felt this sick in the morning was when she'd been pregnant with Emily, but there had been something wonderful to come of that. She'd been able to count off the weeks until the sickness had passed, until the forceps inside her grew into a beautiful baby. The baby she'd always wanted. Now, the tumour felt like the evil invader that would cause her to suffer until it finally killed her. She wanted to cry with the unfairness, the wretchedness, the utter pointlessness of it all. She had a fitful night, filled with mixed-up dreams and waking thoughts about Emily, and had finally fallen into a deep sleep in the early hours of the morning. At some point, she'd heard Dan leave. She closed her eyes and lay still, hoping to quell the nausea, but instead began to think about everything she learned from the day before. About the messages, the hug, the van. She began replaying Emily's entire childhood over in her mind. The new information onto every scene, so that she now saw it in a sickening new light. She saw it clearly now. The extra attention Jerry had always paid to her beautiful daughter, the way he'd hugged her, sometimes lingering just a little too long, the way he'd stood transfixed in the doorway during the water fight in the garden that she'd have with Rosie when she was 10 or 11, as they ran around squealing in their swimsuits. And then there was that time at dinner table a year ago, maybe, when he'd asked if she had a boyfriend. How amused he had been when Em had flushed bright pink and lowered her eyes. Maddie's stomach tugged. The sickness wasn't going to abate. She was going to have to get up and go over with it. She pulled back her duvet and got out of the bed, moved across the room and opened her bedroom door. The house was silent. Emily was still in bed. She moved quickly across the landing and into the bathroom, where she switched on the radio, turned it up loud, lifted the toilet seat, knelt down on the rug and threw up as quietly as she could. The radio was turned on to Radio 3 and a piano concert was playing, the notes tinkling air and higher into the furrow pitch that made her head feel as though it was going to explode. As soon as she was sure she'd finished tying up, she reached out and snapped it off. Mum! Emily was outside the door. A high voice pitched was indication. I'm trying to talk to you. Maddie quickly flushed the toilet, stood up, opened the window. Grabbing her toothbrush, she squeezed the toothpaste onto it, put it into her mouth, and then opened the door. Emily was standing in her pajamas, scowling. The radio was really loud, Mum. You woke me up. I'm sorry, darling. Do you need the bathroom? Maddie said, her mouth full of toothpaste. Yes, but why did you have to have it up so loud? Maddie flicked on her toothbrush, which started whirring noisily, drowning out her daughter. She spat it in the sink and put her toothbrush back in the holder. It's all yours, she smiled. You having a shower? Yeah? Well, toast and 15 then. Maddie stepped out, sliding past her daughter, who was refusing to budge. Emily looked momentarily confused. Okay, she said. They went into the bathroom and shut the door. Maddie walked shakily back into her room and pulled on a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. She had long ago become adept at changing the subject whenever Emily confronted her with one of her enormous transgressions. Keep your centre of gravity, Maddie had read in a parenting book that she'd been editing before she got ill. Don't allow yourself to be buffered by the mood of your teen. But since her diagnostics, changing the subject had become her modus operandi. Dan had often joked that Emily had the attention span of a gnat, which, on occasions like this, definitely worked to Maddie's advantage. She wasn't 100% certain that Emily hadn't heard her being sick, but if she had, something would have kicked off on social media and eclipsed any of her curiosities by the time she'd got dressed and come downstairs. The parenting book didn't give any advice, though, about what to do if you suspected but couldn't prove that your teen was being sexually abused by your husband's boss. That was her problem, and hers alone. The thought about talking to Dan about this filled her with dread. There was no knowing how he would react. Well, there was. He'd storm straight round to Jerry's house and beat the crap out of him. That's what he'd do. And then he'd get arrested and sent to prison. He'd lose his job and, in all likelihood, his career. And then there was Emily, who said the previous time, for God's sake, we had an argument and it's over. Nothing's happened. Before threatening, if you call the police, you'll never see me again. Maddie believed her. She would never forget that night. The night when Emily hadn't come home. It had been the longest night of her life. If she had to compare it, it had been more worse than the night she'd spent after being told she had terminal brain tumour. But now she had that to contend with too, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing her daughter as well. Nothing was worth the risk of what that happening again. If they never saw him again, that would solve the problem, Maddie mused. She wondered if there was any way to make this happen. If there was some agreement that could be made whereby he got to leave the country or something in exchange for her silence. But she immediately felt ashamed for thinking this. It would bring a conclusion for her family, maybe, but there would be other young girls to think about. That was it. She's calling the police. She had to, of course she did. She finished dressing, then headed across the landing and downstairs. She could hear Emily getting out of the shower now. She'd seen her off to school and get straight to the phone. But by the time she boiled the kettle, set the tea to her brew, taken the bread out of its wrapper and popped it into the toaster, she was having second thoughts again. What would the police actually do? Would they head straight to the bank and on East Champ, march into the office and arrest Jerry with nothing but Maddie's word to go on? Surely they'd need some evidence. Surely they'd need a statement from Emily first. Her heart leaped. Christ, what if they want to talk to Emily at her school? Mum, what are you doing? Maddie jumped up from where she'd been leaning on the kitchen counter. Hi, love. Right, toast and jam, is it? Yeah, delayed reaction, Emily said. I took it out of the toaster like 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes? Maddie snorted a laugh. You've only just walked into the kitchen. No, Emily said, grabbing the toast and spreading butter over it quickly to prove a point. I walked into the kitchen 5 minutes ago. You were standing there daydreaming as usual, which is why you didn't see me. You're never with it, Mum. You're always thinking about something else. Maddie reached up into the cupboard and took out the jam, passed it to her daughter, then reached for the teaspoon. Em, she began. Emily picked up her plate of toast and walked over to the table. She already had her earbuds in and was staring at her phone. Okay, Maddie, she sighed to herself, fetching the milk from the fridge. You're going to have to talk to her. Put your phone down, please. I need to talk to you, she said, but only in her head. She cast her mind back to the last time, to the conversation that had taken place. What was the point of even going there? Emily was only going to lie again, and make more threats about leaving home if Maddie went to the police, and then she'd tip him off, of course. He'd have plenty of time to get ready with all the excuses and reasons and alibis, and in the meantime, Emily, true to the current form, would ensure that Maddie thought she was the unreasonable one. Maddie watched her daughter as she sat on the table with her back to her brother, pushing a piece of toast into her mouth and scrolling up, down on her phone. She had longed to stroke with the mane of her beautiful blonde hair, lift it up, tuck it to one side, and wrap her arms around her. She longed to reassure her, tell her that they were in this together, and that they'd work something out, but she knew this was unrealistic. Emily was trying to break away from her, not get close. That's what all the arguments, the confrontations with Maddie were about. Maddie knew that it was completely natural, that Emily was still desperately attached to her mother, but was trying so hard not to be. Deep down, she was frightened of being cast out into the world to fend for herself. She needed her mother more than she would ever let on. But Maddie was going to leave her, wasn't she? And then it would just be the two of them, Emily and Dan. Dan would have to keep working. Emily was going to have to grow up fast, but not like this, not like this, not like this. Her head was now throbbing. Maddie bore it until Emily had left school, then went upstairs, took a headache pill, and climbed back into bed. Just for an hour, she told herself. After that, she needed to get to the hospital for a radiotherapy appointment. She insisted Dan to go to work as normal. That she'd through the treatment by herself. After all, it was going to be relentless every weekday, initially for several weeks, and now that she knew what was going on, it was doubtfully important to keep her illness a secret. She took a breath and tried to relax. As soon as it tore her to pieces to think about what Jerry might do to her daughter, what he might have already done, she had to think ahead to the outcome, and at the moment, all she could see is the distant was screaming argument, threats, slamming doors, and an apologetic police officer shrugging their shoulders at Emily. Yelled at her. For God's sake, Mum, it was nothing. It was just a hug. What the fuck have you done? Even if Emily broke down and admitted everything, things didn't look much brighter. The press wouldn't be allowed to publish her name, but word would get out. Rumours would spread. It would be all round her school, passed on by the parents, who were worse than the kids for gossip. And then she'd be that girl for the rest of her life. Whenever anyone heard Emily's name or walked past in the street, that would be the first thing they'd think about her. She'd never be able to fully get over it. She'd never be allowed to forget. But if it got Jerry off the streets, it had to be done, didn't it? Maddie lifted her phone from the bedside table, her heart thumping. She propped herself on a couple of pillows and tapped the phone icon, ready to dial. But then she paused. How long would he get? Tate had said up to 14 years, but what did that actually mean? Her heart still thumping, she opened the browser, did a search for solicitors' firm in London, and found a criminal law firm in Warren Street with good reviews. She dialed the main number and asked to speak to someone who could give her some advice. I'll put you through. Is this for yourself? The receptionist asked. No, it's for my husband, Maddie said. He's in trouble. The police want to talk to him. No problem. The phone clicked, and another voice answered. It was a man. He told him his name, Stephen, and asked for hers. Angie, she lied. Okay, Angie, how can I help you? My husband is, she faltered. Is this confidential? At the moment, I'm really just in a bit of advice. Totally confidential, Stephen said. I'm not allowed to tell anyone what you say to me. Besides which, you don't have to tell me your surname. Let's just have a chat. Let's see if I can help. Maddie breathed out, reassured. "It's my husband," she said. He's been seeing a 14-year-old girl. As in sleeping with her. Yes, he's told you this. Yes, Maddie said again, feeling a flush of shame at the thought of Dan doing such a thing, not to mention her supposed complicity. "You want to know if the police can prove it, and if they can, you want to know what sentence he'd get." "Can I talk to him?" "He's scared to talk to anyone," Maddie said. "He asked me to call you just to a couple of questions before he hands himself into the police." "Okay, well, I'm afraid I can't go into detail with you. I need to speak to him, but I can give you some general guidance based on what you've told me." "Okay, I'd appreciate that, thanks." "Did the police have a statement from the girl?" Maddie hesitated. "No," she said. "Are they likely to get one?" Maddie hesitated again. "No, it seems she's not willing." "So how do the police know about this?" "Her mother has found messages and she's seen them together and has told the police, but the girl won't give a statement, so we don't know what will happen next." "Okay," Stephen said. "Well, the police can prosecute any crime without a victim's statement if there is good evidence for other sources, the mother, the phone messages, and such like. But without the victim, it would be a much weaker case. I don't think I can tell you much more than that without knowing the specific facts, and for that, I need to talk to your husband." "Okay," Maddie cleared her throat. "I'm so sorry, I don't want to waste your time. So can I just ask, if he's convicted, what sentence would he get?" "Again, it depends what he's charged with, and all the facts of the case. But if you get him to give me a call, I can go through it with him. In the meantime, if you do a search online for something called Crown Court Sentencing Guidelines, you'll find a list of offences, all the aggravating and mitigating features. For sexual activity with a child of 14, there's a starting point of 5 years." "5 years?" Maddie repeated, falling silent. "Yes," Stephen said, misinterpreting the dismay in her voice and softening his own to reassure her. "But of course, he'd only serve half. If he got 5 years, he'd be out in 2.5. Maddie went cold. 2.5, was that all? Her head started to buzz. She vaguely remembered thanking Stephen of the conversation must be ended here, but her mind had already jogged on ahead 2.5 years, to the moment when Jerry walked out of the prison and back into Emily's life again, a life with him in it, but no Maddie. The thought was horrific, but that was the reality. She'd almost certainly no longer be there. Or would she? She might survive longer than predicted, but what kind of life would it be? She felt hot tears creep into the corner of her eyes and roll down her cheeks onto the memory of her mother. Maddie couldn't think of her without being reminded of her indignity and pain she had suffered in her final months. She imagined spending another year, another 2, feeling the way she was feeling right now, with this low, dull, sometimes unbearable pain coursing through her head. The nausea, the throwing up, the brain fog, and it could get worse, much worse. Early onset vascular dementia, common with her type of tumour, as was paralysis. She could become bedbound, unless a burden, her life reduced to nothing but rounds of chemotherapy. And how could she hide it from Emily? Not for long. Reality was that it could be a slow, upsetting deterioration. She could use up the best years of Emily's life. Maddie forced herself to slow her breathing and swiped her phone to check the exact time of her hospital appointment, but as she did, the phone slipped out of her hand and dropped to the floor. She leaned down to pick it up and felt a sudden shooting pain down the back of her head. She screamed out loud and fell sideways onto the bed, clutching her head in her palms and drawing her knees up to her chest. She stayed like that, massaging the back of her skull until the pain abated a little, then reached out and tugged the duvet back over her. "I can't take this anymore," she told herself, knowing deep in her core that this was true. "I just can't take any more of this. What the hell am I going to do?" And then, like a wish from a genie, it came to her. She felt goosebumps as the idea slowly dawned to him. There was a way. She didn't have to be a burden or a victim. She still had control over her own destiny. She wasn't yet at the stage yet, mother had got to when it was already too late, but it had all been taken out of her hands. Her spirits lifted instantly. There was hope. She knew she could survive another day, another week, another month, or more of this pain as long as she got to be in a driving seat, the one in control. She punched the pillow hard with all the strength she could muster. Thump! Fuck the tumor, thump, and fuck him too. She was going to survive a little longer, but on her terms, not theirs. She took a deep breath, in and out, and let her shoulders drop, feeling the enormous flood of relief and clarity that comes with having made a momentous, life-changing decision, like the decision to leave a job you hate or an unhappy marriage. It was the feeling she'd had after she and Dan had decided to stop trying for a second baby, immediate releasing themselves from a perpetual cycle of hope and anguish that had taken over their lives. It was knowing in her heart of hearts, because of the way you feel after you've made it, that the decision is not just the right one, it's the only one. In a moment, she was going to take another headache pill, and then she was going to rest, truly rest, for a while. And then she was going to get up and get herself to the radiotherapy appointment. A treatment would shrink the tumour, keep things at bay for a little while. She had time. She would have long enough for what she wanted to do. Chapter 40. Maddie slept for an hour, a deep, dreamless sleep. At midnight, her phone under her pillow vibrated and nudged her awake. After a moment of confusion, she remembered why she had woken and sat up, focused now. She pushed back the covers, padded down the landing, and crept into her daughter's bedroom. She looked at the bed, searching into the darkness for the body-shaped lump under the duvet. She listened to the sound of Emily's breathing, just as she had done many times before. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she scanned the floor to make sure that there was nothing in her path, a stray gym bag or a trainer she could trip over. Then she tiptoed to the window and rolled back the blind to let in a little light. Maddie knew from experience that this wouldn't disturb her daughter, that it would take a hurricane or an earthquake to wake Emily within the first few hours of the night. In the morning, too, it had been hard to bruise her at times. There had been more arguments than Maddie cared to remember about Emily still being in bed 15 minutes before she was due to leave for school. But for once, she was really grateful that her daughter was such a sound sleeper. The biggest issue for Maddie right now was her poor coordination, which could quite literally trip her up. She had to go carefully, slowly, and think through every step, tell her muscles what to do, give them time to react. She moved slowly back towards the bed, her heart thumping, and her fingers trembling a little as she reached for her daughter's phone. It was face down, on charge, on the bedside table as usual. Maddie picked it up, pulled out the cable, and switched it on, and glanced across at Emily, whose head was tilted back on the pillow, her mouth gaping slightly, her forehead furrowed as though in concentration, as if she was watching a movie or trying to make sense of the plot. Maddie hovered in the half-light, leaning towards, making sure to keep her balance, and held the phone out towards Emily's upturned head. She inched her phone gently forward until it was touching Emily's fingertip. A second later, she felt a small nudge of her phone lit up. Yes! Her heart skipped a beat. She'd done it. She was in. Oh. She turned the phone round to face her, and instantly unsettled. Emily's homepage was a photo of her and Rosie, arm in arm, their tongues pushed out playfully towards the person behind the camera. Emily was wearing her new bikini. In the background, Maddie recognised the Lido, the open-air swimming pool at the Parliament Hill. Maddie had taken her there that day. She trusted her. She hadn't pressed her as to who else would be there. It's just the usual crowd, Mum. You don't have to ask me every time. But who was the one behind the camera? Getting a good eyeful of her daughter's beautiful, slim, semi-naked body, and that of a shorter, fuller-figured friend. The thought made her stomach turn. Keeping her thumb on the screen, she tiptoed back over towards the window, where she lowered the blind before stepping carefully out of the door. She crept downstairs and into the kitchen, where she sat on the counter and pulled open her laptop. She now had access to the stored passwords to all Emily's social media accounts. Even without the phone nearby, she would have access to every web-based message logs. She opened the messaging app's web page in her browser, tapped the matching icon on Emily's homepage, selected link a device from the three-button menu in the top right-hand corner, and when the camera appeared, pointed the phone up to the QR code displayed on the web browser page. She waited as Emily's message loaded, and there he was, the red heart, right at the top. Her caller too, her most frequent contact, above Rosie even. Maddie wanted to weep as she scrolled through the weeks and months of messages, through the jokes, the banter, the flirting that made it patently obvious there were far more to each than was natural, that there was nothing innocent about that hug outside the van. The texts were the stuff of a romantic relationship that was heading towards intimacy, but Maddie realised with an almost relief, still didn't appear to have got there. He was still trying, oh so hard, showering her with praise and adoration, doing her bidding, picking her up and taking her places, buying her food, sweets and alcohol. He was the perfect listener, never passing judgment, only occasionally offering the old snippet of helpful advice during her many tales of woe about all the shit, as she referred to, in her life. Maddie skimmed over those messages, not wanting to be hurt by anything said about her by her daughter in the moment of anger. Instead, she focused on the sexual references. I'm sorry, we don't have to do anything, not until you're ready. And then, in the next breath, you're just so beautiful, so amazing, so gorgeous. It's so hard to keep my hands off you. Can you understand that? I want you so badly, Em. You're all I think about the first thing in the morning until I go to sleep. These were the messages that Maddie zoomed into, the ones that lit up and stroked the fire inside her, the ones that strengthened her resolve to go through with this, no matter what. Before this, she'd just had things she'd been told about him, complete with a hug captured on a camera and a handful of messages. But now, she could see it for herself. The unnatural obsession, the lust, the sickening urges, and the betrayal of his relationship with Dan to get to her. It was all there on her computer screen. Maddie had never wanted to harm anyone before. She had always been so level-headed, so law-abiding, so reasonable and forgiving. Hatred with Athemia to her. She'd never seen the point in such a negative emotion, but now she did. She felt the anger rising within her as mentally as she launched herself at him, grabbing fistfuls of his hair, gouging in his cheeks with her fingernails. The feeling was electric. She now understood the power of vengeance and the energy it gave. But she also knew that this fire inside her was going to burn her too, if she let it. She needed to find a way to separate and switch off her emotions so that she could plan this. But at the same time, she looked at her daughter and felt nothing but love in treasured moments they had left together. She needed to be detached, forensic about this, like a career thief planning a heist, or a novelist or a screenwriter writing a story. Her heart flipped. That was it. It was the only way for her to get through it. This would be her story, the one she'd always wanted to write. Chapter 41. Maddie phoned me 2 days later and asked me to meet her at the hospital. I was in the office when the mobile rang, and my name flashed up. I have a plan, she said. Come and meet me. Tell me you're not well. Tell them you're not well, that you need to go to the hospital. Then come to the UCH. That's where I am. Meet me at the radiotherapy unit. I did a quick Google search for low pressure fainting serious, then walked over to Hayley's desk and told her that the cancellation appointment had come up at UCH for a treatment I'd been waiting for, and that I needed to get there. God, it sounds serious, she frowned. I thought you just fainted. It's all to do with my blood pressure, I said. They did tests. They think it's my heart. God, said Hayley again. She eyed up with genuine concern. I hope you're okay. I have a hole in my heart. She lied. I was born with it. There had been a girl at the school who had been born with a hole in her heart. She'd very occasionally skipped school for treatment, but otherwise she didn't really seem to have any problems, so it seemed like a condition for me to adopt. Oh my gosh, Haley said, I'm so sorry. Do you have a pacemaker? Not yet, I said, but they might be giving me one. That didn't sound particularly creditable, and I immediately wish I hadn't said it, but Haley didn't seem to notice. We should do a health and safety risk assessment, she said. Sure, I agreed. But if I'm going to make the appointment, I just need to. I nodded towards the door. Go, if that's okay. Of course, she said. I'll let Dan know. I booked a cab as I walked to the lift, and it turned up quickly and took me to the hospital, where Maddie was waiting for me on the bench to the foyer on the oncology centre. We could power and drain, but somehow uplifted at the same time. I brought sweet chai teas and 2 cinnamon buns from the hospital cafe, and we went out and sat on the bench in a small courtyard under the ornamental willow tree, sipping from the cardboard cups and licking sugar from our lips while Maddie told me what she had in mind. I thought it was a joke at first, because she seemed so upbeat. It's the perfect building, she said. Not only does he work there, he's got an office with a sofa and a fridge and everything, so it's the obvious place. But it's 100 meters high, 300 feet. That's just about optimal, apparently. It's pretty much the perfect height. The perfect height for, I began warily. It's the optimal height, she said matter-of-factly, blowing over the rim of her paper. If you want to guarantee that you won't survive the fall, but at the same time, you don't want too much time to think about it on the way down. A lump formed in my throat. It was as though she was talking me through a plot of TV thriller rather than something that was actually going to happen in real life. But I quickly realised that she was serious, that she had been thinking of nothing else since I'd last seen her. Maddie, I whispered, you don't mean this. This isn't right. There must be another way. No. She was gentle but firm. There is no other way, Tate. I've been over it, and over it in my head, and I'm going to die sooner or later anyway. You might have a few years left, I said. You might be okay. Tate. She shook her head, and after a moment's hesitation, she reached out and took my hand. I'm in pain, so much, all of the time. But that's just the treatment, isn't it? It'll be over soon. No. There's only so much treatment you can have. It's delaying the inevitable. It's no way to live. It's only going to get worse. But Emily wouldn't want this. You're right, she wouldn't. But she's going to lose me anyway. I'm her mother, and I know what's best for her. It's my job to look out for her, trust me. There is no other way of doing this that is not going to end up with my daughter be able to grieve like a normal person, and then get on with the rest of your life. So your life for hers? I said. Yes, she agreed. But my life is no life, so for me, it's a no-brainer. A pause. I'm sorry. We don't have to be downhearted. This way, I get to have control over my own destiny, and now I have a purpose. My life would have been for nothing. I still get to leave my mark on the world. I do get that, I said. So, will you hear me out? I nodded again, and listened while she told me her idea for our script, as she kept calling it. It was just an outline, she said. She just needed my help, mine and Helen's, to write, rehearse and perform it. It would be the most important story we'd ever have to write, she told me. And between the 3 of us, we could fine-tune it to the point of perfection to ensure that nothing could go wrong. I called another cab, took her home and helped her into bed. She was silent on the way back, closing her eyes and breathing deeply. I could tell she was in pain, but she looked peaceful. Happier than I've ever seen her, in fact. I thought about it for 2 days, mulling it over. It was grim, but it was a solution. It was a potential sentence that convicted me in the end. 2.5 years. That was not justice for Emily, nor for what Jerry had done to me and Helen, and who knew how many other girls after that. He was a serial abuser. He was evil. He needed to be stopped. What if we talked Emily into going to court and giving evidence against him, and then he called her a liar, and the jury believed him? Maddie was right. The thought of destroying Emily's spirit, her life, her reputation, only to see him walk free at the end of it, was too horrific to bear. After work on the Friday, Helen and I picked up margaritas and Guernsey sticks from Pizza Union in Cross Chris and drove to Maddie's. Dan had left the afternoons for a conference in Paris, and Emily was staying the night at Rosie's, so we had the house to ourselves. We arranged ourselves at the kitchen table with the plates of pizza, notepaper, and pens. Maddie had her laptop open in front of her and had created a document entitled A Mother's Love, WIP First Draft. Helen was on board, but nervous. What if we get caught? She said. I said, we'll just have to make sure that we don't. But what if we do? Look, right now, we're just writing a story, a script, Maddie said. It could be pure fiction, and honestly, you don't have to be involved in it any more than that. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. And what about Tate? She doesn't have to do anything either. Well, I will, I said resourcefully. I'll do anything you need. Maddie shot me a look of gratitude. Don't worry, Hal, I said. You can have a bit part. A minor role. Maddie and I will star. Maddie gave me another warm smile, and we settled down to write. Helen's only role for now, was decided, would be to continue to keep Emily under surveillance. This was at Maddie's request, and there was nothing illegal about it. After all, she'd been acting in prevention of a crime, and of the three of us, she was the best place to do this. Emily didn't know it yet, or my car, and Helen's job gave her enough flexibility to get away from work at the end of the school day. Whenever there was a plan for her and Jerry to be alone, we would conspire to ensure that something would happen to prevent it. Something or other would crop up to bring Emily home early, or alternatively to prevent her from getting out of the first place. This was a benefit, not a threat, we figured. The frustration he'd feel at this, the wait for his prize, would only serve to ensure that, when the time came, he'd be sufficiently hooked. Any sign of her getting into the vehicle with him, or any wise being alone, you call me. I'll make sure they're interrupted, Maddie told us. What about Dan? I said. Maddie's fingers continued to tap the keyboard. What if he finds out? How's he going to find out? I don't know, I said. Maybe because Haley watches my every move. I'm sure she thinks I've got the hots for him. Maddie stopped typing and looked up at me, intrigued. Does she? Well, yeah, I mean, first she sees me lurking in your garden, and then the next day she sees me going into his office. I'm not sure if she noticed his diary and photo had gone, but she doesn't miss very much. Maddie snorted. Sounds like she's the one who has the hots for him. I know, right? Okay, Maddie said, nodding sagely. So let's use it. Let's make it work for us. When I look baffled, she said, I've edited enough books to know that every potential threat to the plot is an opportunity in disguise. Plot? Helen shivered and shook her head. What? I smiled. Well, it sounds so Macbeth, like with the three witches. I grinned. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Maddie chuckled. So, when shall we three meet up again? I said. Tuesday, upon the heath? Maddie went back. Bit cold, I said. How about my place, or Helen's, Claire Henry's? That would be perfect. Nobody will come looking for us, any of us there. Helen looked uncomfortable. Are you okay with this, Hel? I asked her gently. She sighed. She looked from me to Maddie and back again. I want to do it. I really want to stop him from hurting Emily, from hurting anyone ever again. But it's not just a script, is it? It's a conspiracy to commit a crime. If we get caught, we could go to prison for a very long time. We won't, said Maddie. Between us, we'll make sure of it. That's why I need your help. In order to conceal her illness, Maddie had taken a substitute to work a creative idea. I've realised that if I don't do it now, I never will, she told her employer, which was entirely true. We wrote together any opportunity we got, pretending to everyone at the office that they were my own. I went with Maddie to hospital appointments, or met her there with Helen after we'd both finished work. The ideas kept coming, the obstacles got raised, the plot holes got addressed. We found that any obstacle is better dealt with head on. Better to bring it out of the open and throw the ideas around until you find a solution. We discovered that there's always an answer if you open your mind wide enough. Helen's apprehension was soon overweight swayed by her love of the creative process. She turned out to be an excellent researcher, looking into the legal and medical aspects. That the tumour would show up on the social media records was a problem, she said, and we spent an entire week discussing this. We knew the direction we were going, the objective we wanted to achieve, and we lost sight of that. Maddie didn't want to waste a single moment, and even when she was drained from the radiation and sick from the chemo, we would collect her in the car and take her to Helen's flat, where we'd work late into the night. Maddie would doze on the couch whenever she needed to. I would look up as she fell silent, then pull her laptop round to face me and take over typing. She would occasionally stir and prop herself on the cushions to chip in any ideas or directions before drifting back again. At the office, I watched Jerry, observed his habits, his routines, who came in and out of his room. In late November, I managed to invite myself along to an evening in the bar with Haley and some of the other secretaries, and I made sure to sit strategically facing him, clocking the cigarettes he went outside for, and watching what and how much he drank. On a Saturday, in early December, we had our dress rehearsal, only I played Maddie's part for her. I went in through the entrance in the basement car park, letting myself in through the gate, wearing Dan's coat, with Dan's pass, bypassing the cameras in the lift by heading past the gym, and up the stairwell, and onto the roof. Meanwhile, Helen hovered near the entrance, peering through the glass, ready to enter the minute that Kevin, the weekend security guard, stepped into the foyer. But he remained in his office the whole time, watching strictly with his feet up on the desk with a giant bag of popcorn on his lap. The preparations took us a little over 2 months. Soon it would be an evening of the office Christmas party. Soon it would be the evening of the office Christmas party. We were ready. It was time. Part 6. Chapter 42. Friday, the 9th of December. I weaved my way through the crowded room towards the glass door that led out onto the terrace. Spirits were high, and the Christmas karaoke was in full swing. Dan and Haley had just done a Newt shoddy Elton John and Kiki D. Now he was up singing an Elvis number, pulling open his shirt buttons and gyrating his hips. He could sing all right. He still had that voice, the one that had melted my heart all those years ago. He still had that floppy fringe and his brown eyes that had held mine as if they would never let me go. But it had all been an act, just like this one, as I cringed as I watched him. He'd no doubt only picked an Elvis song as an excuse to bare his chest and thrust his groin at the female interns. It made me feel sick. On the other hand, it was just what I needed. I hovered nearby watching, waiting for the moment as he chugged Chablis straight from the bowl, and his big man thing, his way of telling everyone that he was the CEO of the bank, and that expensive wine was just like water to someone as successful as him. As Dan and Haley sang their last "I Won't Go Breaking Your Heart" and handed back their microphones to him, he started his warm-up, flexing his shoulders and rotating his neck. He set the bowl down on the nearby table and stepped into the spotlight, grabbing the microphone from its stand. The bar was crowded, all eyes were on him as he lewd his performance. The male associates gorfing and doubled up with laughter, the females grinning politely but no doubt wanted to knee him hard in the groin. Nobody noticed as I moved on the bottle, lifted it swiftly from the table and drawing it up into the bell sleeve in my green silk maxi dress, where I concealed it quickly, my hand encased in a silver clear vinyl glove. As I reached the door, I spotted several people from my department congregating in the smoking area outside. I stopped short and crept back into the shadows behind the coats at the corner of the bar. When I was sure no one else was looking in my direction, I went outside into the cold night air and round the corner where, Carefully clutching a bottle, I climbed up the narrow fire escape to the upper floor of the terrace. When I got to the top, I set the bottle down for a moment and caught my breath. The view was better here, but nobody ever came up this far. There was no heat, little lighting, and no seating, and the fire escape was narrow and awkward to climb. I picked up the bottle again and moved it nearer to the wall, trying not to think about the sheer drop beyond the railing, plunging down to the street below. I felt my knees weaken, but drew close to the edge until I reached the railing that bordered the building. Holding it tight, I bent down behind one of the angled skylights and tucked the bottle through the gap between the skylight and the wall. I took off my final glove and pushed it in my handbag, which was stripped across my body, then headed back down to the fire escape to the terrace below. The group of associates from my department had disappeared and gone back inside. I moved into the smoking area and sat down on the table under the awning. It was pleasantly lit, with pretty lights strung along a trellis and a tall outdoor kerosene patio heater shaped like a Christmas tree, which let out a warm amber glow. After a short while, 2 secretaries from the 18th came out, wobbling in their high heels and shivering in their thin party dresses. They smiled at me and lit their cigarettes, spoke in hushed tones while they smoked them, then left. A few more people came and went. Eventually, he came, Jerry. He was drunk and sweating, his shirt buttons still open. He stuck a cigarette in his mouth and flicked his lighter, lifted an arm and wiped his forehead with a rolled-up sleeve. He spotted me and eyed me curiously for a moment. I could tell he was trying to remember who I was. "Want one?" he offered, swaying a little. I shook my head. "Just put one out." "So, who are you?" he asked, scowling. "Tate." I told him. "Pardon me?" he said rudely, loudly. "My name's Tate." "Kate! Tate!" I repeated, with a T. I moistened my lips. "T," I said again, and watched his face as I enunciated the letter, unable to resist seeing if it had lit a spark of recognition, but my name meant nothing. I had meant nothing. "Tate," he sneered. "Yes." "Do you have a gallery?" he asked, then snorted happily. "Funny," I said without smiling. "I'd like to see it," he grinned. "Would you?" I stood up. He looked a little taken aback. I gave him my most salicious pout, took the hem of my skirt between my thumb and forefinger and slid it up my leg, and little before stopping, back down it went. Up again. Would I? Wouldn't I? But I wasn't smiling. I wasn't friendly. "I know your sort," he said, sounding frightened. "My sort? Prick tease." No personal pronouns. He was very drunk. "Oh," I said, "so I'm a tease." "Yeah, and you're a prick." This time I was smiling. His jaw dropped. He glared at me for a moment, then took one last drag of his cigarette and dropped it on the ground. "Your history," he tried to say, but it came out as "ristory." He turned round and headed back through the door onto the bar. When I was certain he'd gone, I took the fresh vinyl glove out of the packet in my handbag and pulled it on, then leaned down and picked up the cigarette butt with a finger and thumb and folded it into my palm. I climbed back up to the fire escape and onto the roof with it. I dropped it onto the ground with 2 others. I had enough now, I figured. All had gone smoothly. My evening's work was done. Chapter 43. It was pitch black outside her living room window, but it wasn't time yet. Maddie swallowed a couple of headache pills, then lay back on the sofa and dozed lightly for a while. When she woke, the pressure inside her skull had eased a little, but had been replaced by a lingering sadness. She knew this was to be expected, but she also didn't doubt herself for a second. All the planning, all the preparation that had gone into this moment had given her plenty of opportunity for reflection, and, honestly, she was ready. She felt ready. Everything was coming together. She just needed to stay strong. She pushed her hand under the cushion behind her head and pulled out Emily's phone. She bought a new Samsung and a supermarket SIM card, one that wouldn't activate, at least not without money. The plan had been to swap the SIM out for Emily's and for Maddie's to use the new phone, but she no longer needed to do this. and it was better this way. In the end, it had all happened so originally, so perfectly. Not that she'd enjoyed seeing her husband and daughter fighting, but when Dan had grounded Emily and confiscated her phone, Maddie felt a sense of ease about it all. That it was all happening the way it was meant to be. Emily's phone could simply go missing from the kitchen cabinet where Dan had put it. Most importantly, at the crucial time, both Emily and Dan would safely be at home. After Dan had left the office party, Maddie had gone upstairs to confront her crying daughter. The argument with Dan had been over something trivial, Emily's attitude, her limpness, which would all be forgiven in 24 hours' time. Emily would need her father more than ever. But in the meantime, this was Maddie's chance to get there for her. She had taken up some hot chocolate, tapped on the door, and asked if she could come in. I hate him, Emily had moaned, lying on her bed and wiping her tear and coal-streaked eyes. He's the worst father in the world. Maddie had placed the cocoa on the bedside table and sat down next to her. He loves you, Em. Well, he's got a funny way of showing it. You'll understand when you have your own children, Maddie said. But the thought of Emily's children unexpectedly made her cry. Mum! Emily had looked unsettled then and sat up, wrapping her arms around her mother. Don't cry, Mum, she said. It's all right. Me and Dad will be okay. I know you will. Maddie wiped away her tears and kissed her daughter. She hadn't intended for Emily to wind up confronting her, but she'd be glad of the opportunity to hold her in her arms, to stroke her hair without giving anything away. You're growing up, Em, she said. And that's hard for your Dad, because in his head you'll always be his little girl. That may seem annoying now, but one day you'll look back and treasure it. Never forget that he loves you, and will never stop loving you, no matter what, and neither will I. What's it like when you have children? Emily had asked her. Do you love them as much as you love your parents? Oh, Em, Maddie wanted to laugh. It's a love like no other. I can't begin to tell you. You love them more. I can't imagine loving anyone more than I love my parents, Emily had said matter-of-factly, and Maddie's heart had swelled and broken and swelled again. They'd lain back on Emily's bed then, playing games. Which 4 famous people would you invite to dinner? Maddie had asked. Emily had replied confidently. Marcus Aurelius, Rosa Parks, Greta Thunberg, and Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler? Maddie had gasped. Why Adolf Hitler? So that I could ask him why, Emily said. And then me and the others would change his mind and change history and save the lives of the million of poor Jews. And what if he wouldn't listen? Then he wouldn't get a very nice pudding, would he? Emily had said this in a clipped, sinister, upper-class English voice, like a 1940s movie villain. She'd done it so perfectly that made Maddie laugh out loud. She told Emily what a good actress she was, and Emily had asked, Do you really think so? And Maddie had said that she really did. Emily had looked pleased and said shyly that she'd thought about joining the school drama club, but she didn't know if she was any good. Maddie had said that she really was, insisting that she wouldn't have said it if she didn't mean it, and Emily had looked even more pleased and said that maybe she would give it a go. Maddie fought back tears now, as she thought about her amazing daughter, about everything she already was, and everything she could yet be. She was doing this for Emily, and not just Emily. She was doing it for who knew how many other young girls Jerry had already harmed, or would go on to harm in the future. In the next 24 hours, things would begin rolling towards their conclusion. Before too long, Emily would be free to live the life she'd be destined to live, and Maddie would be able to rest in peace, knowing that she'd played her part, setting things in motion, all ready for Tate to take the next step. So long as she got this next bit right, they had him. She was certain of it. It would bring closure for her, for Tate, for Helen, for Emily, and an end to all the hurt, all the pain. She checked the time on her phone. Midnight. Emily would be asleep now. Maddie swung her legs off the sofa and tiptoed upstairs, turned the door handle to Emily's room and crept inside. As she'd done last time, she carefully stepped over to the window and rolled up the blind to let in a little light. She moved towards the bed again. Emily was on her back, her mouth ajar and her receding over the pillow and framing her face like a halo. Maddie took in her daughter's beautiful features, the long, thick lashes and upturned nose, the gentle ridges that led from her nostrils to her bow-shaped upper lip, her soft, velvety cheek with its youthful, unblemished skin. Hot, silent tears came then. She ached and ached to lean forward and plant a kiss on the cheek that she'd nuzzled her face into when Emily was a baby. Instead, she held the phone out and, for the final time, found her way in. Chapter 44. Saturday, the 10th of December. So, this was the day. It had begun like any other December day with a slight frost, iced over rainwater in the buckets by the greenhouse. Crows on the lawn, pecking at the last of the autumn apples that nobody had bothered to pick this year. For weeks, Maddie had watched them slowly ripen, then, one by one, drop from the tree to the ground. There was hundreds of them. Normally Dan would have picked them up and whacked them into the bushes with a tennis racket. This year he hadn't bothered to do that either. But Maddie thought they looked beautiful. Like a croquet blanket or a vast ball pit of red, gold and yellow stretching across one whole corner of the garden and reflecting the light of the bright winter sun. Now, it was mid-afternoon and the light was fading. Maddie was sitting in her favourite chair by the patio doors in the kitchen, listening intently to an argument that Dan and Emily were having on the landing upstairs. "I haven't got it," Emily was yelling. "You took it off me." "Yes," said Dan, "and now it's not where I left it." "I haven't got it," Emily pleaded. "I don't know how many times I have to tell you." "Well, where is it then?" "I don't know." A pause. "If you've lost it, I haven't lost it." "Why would I have lost it?" "I don't know." Emily's voice was sullen. "But you were the last one to have it. Maybe you took it with you when you went out last night." "You owe me a phone, Dad." "I'll try ringing it." "It won't ring. I left it on silent." "Emily, if you've got it and you're lying to me, oh my God. First you ground me for no reason, and now this. I swear, it's like every day you're deliberately trying to start an argument." A laugh. Dan's voice saying, "Ring, ring. Yes, hello, Mr. Kettle, it's Spot here. You're black." "Oh, shut up, Dad. You're not funny. And where are you phoning from? The 20th century?" "Pardon?" "Phones don't go ring, ring anymore. You're such a fucking dinosaur." "Stop swearing, Em. You're always swearing." Dan sounded tired. "And you're always being a fucking idiot." "I mean it. Stop." "What are you going to do? You can't ground me if I'm already grounded." "Don't push me, Em. I swear one more time I'm already a prisoner in this house. I might as well actually do something to deserve being locked up." The sound of the door slamming. Silence. Dan's feet on the stairs. "I don't think she's got it," he said, coming into the kitchen and scratching his head. "But it's really odd. He'll turn up." Maddie turned her head towards the window to the garden. Dan walked over and crouched down in front of her, wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. Maddie looked out over his shoulder at the fading light and remembered how much they'd loved this garden. In the summer, when Emily was small, there had been a paddling pool under the apple trees. She could see it now, Emily splashing and jumping in and out of the water, Dan standing on the patio with an apron on, tending to the barbecue. She could feel the summer heat on her shoulders and her arms on this as she sat on the lounger calling to Emily to come to her, a bottle of sunscreen in one hand and an open book on her knee. They were good memories, once a treasure, the three of them together, happy. Memories for Dan and Emily to hold on to. She felt for the phone in her pocket, curling her fingers around it. "Need the toilet," she murmured. Dan abruptly let her go, anticipating a bout of sickness. She gave him a gentle smile and walked out of the kitchen and into the downstairs cloakroom, bolting the door behind her and pulling down the toilet leak. She lowered herself onto the seat. She slid the phone out of the pocket and switched it on. She took a breath. It was time, right? And Emily and Dan had set the mood so perfectly. Why not stay with that feeling and run with it? Sink into it, feel it, become Emily. Maddie tapped into the new password she created the previous night, and when she turned the phone to location services and changed the security settings, she opened the messaging app and brought up the latest messages from Emily. Jerry hadn't yet responded, which was a little too perturbing. He was normally as keen as mustard, but there had been an office party last night, and had no doubt he'd been hungover all day. He'd been in debt to his wife and trying to play the good husband, but it'd be a low in mood too. And now I need of a pickup, perhaps. Slowly, her fingers shaking, she began to type. Please, can you come and get me? My dad's doing my head in. Can't take it anymore. Gotta get out of there. And send. Maddie drew in a sharp breath and waited. Within moments, she could see the ellipses moving and the word typing. And then came the reply. Hold tight, baby. Today's not the best. I'll get some time off tomorrow. Maddie breathed in and out, then typed. I can't wait until tomorrow. If I don't get out of the house, then something's going to happen. The reply was swift. What do you mean? You said you loved me, Maddie typed. I do, baby. The message came back. You know I do. So why can't we just go somewhere? It's not that simple. It can't be if you want. It can be if you want it to be. Em, you're scaring me. Well, I'm not scared. A pause. Don't do anything hasty. Think about it. Maddie typed. You said we can go anywhere when no one knows us. When you're 16, I said. When no one can stop us. Can't wait till then. Mads? Dan's voice came through the door. You right in there? Maddie turned the phone off and pushed it into her pocket, stood up and pressed and flushed the toilet, washed her hands and opened the door. You okay, love? Dan asked. She nodded. Yes, I think I'll go upstairs and lie down for a bit. Upstairs, Maddie crawled into bed, fully clothed, took the phone out of her pocket again. There were 2 more messages. Wait, I can't get out in an hour. I can get out in an hour or so. I'll phone you then, okay? And then she hadn't replied. Please tell me you're not going to do anything rash. Maddie waited, counting the minutes as she put herself in Emily's position mentally, packed herself a bag and climbed out onto the bedroom window onto the porch outside. In her head, she dropped to the ground and jogged to the end of the street and round the corner, then out onto the upper street and down to the green. The number 43 bus would be waiting. 2 minutes to board it. She looked at her phone. Please don't blank me, let's talk about this. Maddie shifted onto her side so she was facing the wall. I've left, she typed. I've done it. I don't have any money. Can you book me a hotel? A slight delay and then, where are you? Maddie typed. On a bus. Which bus? Tell me the name of the hotel and I'll go there. He replied, I can't book a hotel with a credit card, baby. It will leave a trail. I need somewhere to stay, Maddie typed. I'm not going home. I can meet you with my van in an hour. I'm not sleeping in a van. In the van, she told me. I need somewhere proper. Why can't we get a hotel together? You can pay with cash. I pause. Together? Yeah, if you like. Maddie imagined his face as he read this, the dark, filthy thoughts that would run through his mind. You sure about this? Came his reply a moment later. Maddie took a breath. Yeah, I'm sure. Another pause. Maddie could almost feel his excitement. And then, as she expected, we can't go to a hotel, baby. You're 15, I'm 48. It just wouldn't look right. Brilliant, Maddie thought to herself. Bloody brilliant. Not only had she steered him in the right direction, but his self-acknowledged privation was there on the phone in black and white. Your office, then. Just for tonight. You told me that you have a sofa and a fridge and everything. We can go there. Maddie waited nervously now, anticipating his objections, feeling his dilemma. His office? It'd be the ultimate prize. He could persuade her to let him fuck her on his desk, and then he could think about it with a grin on his face every single day after that. I'm not sure, baby, came his reply. It's a bit risky. But he wanted it. Of course he did. You don't have to do anything. I've got my dad's security pass. I know how to get in, Maddie typed. What are you doing with the security pass? I took it so I could stay in the office if I couldn't get hold of you. I'll let myself in through the car park entrance. No one needs to know. There are cameras and security. I'm wearing Dad's coat. I'll put the hood up. Maddie took a long, deep breath. I'm going there. You can come or not. It's up to you. She switched the phone off and then pushed it under her pillow and closed her eyes. She lay still for a moment, imagining his reaction as she figured out his next move. Soon, she'd get up. She'd say goodbye to this room, to this house, to her husband. She'd make an excuse, and then she'd go to her darling daughter to say her goodbyes for the very last time. A tear slid out of her eye, but she quickly wiped it away. There was no time for sentimentality. Sentimentality wouldn't lock the filthy bastard up for life. She was going to die anyway. This way, it would be over quickly, and the pain would be fleeting. Finite. Far more bearable than the relentless drip, drip, drip of the pain and discomfort that was eating away at her now. For the millionth time, she saw herself falling. She dreamed about it, but she never felt the landing. There was never a landing. There was just the wonderful release, the sensation of floating away in the air, carried on a breeze up onto the sky and through space, where she would soon be at one with the universe. She'd get to see her parents again. The thought was uplifting, and Dan and Em in turn would join her when their lives had been lived and their time had come. There would be a family reunion to look forward to in the future. She really believed that. There was nothing to be sorry about. It would be all worthwhile. She just had to do this first. It would be her final gift to Emily and Dan. There was a small vibration from underneath the pillow, which made her jump. Then she remembered. The burner phone. She pulled it out and read the message. Hey, how's it going? She replied, oh good, I think I've caught him. Really? Tell you in a minute. She pulled out Emily's phone, checked it. There was a string of messages, telling her how to get into the office building without anyone from security seeing her, how to avoid the cameras on the way up. He seemed desperate. Maddie read through them, skimming them until she got to the last one. She smiled to herself as she read, I'll meet you there as soon as I can. Oof. Chapter 45. Pause for breath. Take a sip of my drink. I finished the wine ages ago, and Sarah and I are both drinking tap water from the jug on the table. I've been too engrossed in my story, and Sarah had been listening too intently for either of us to want to stop and call the waiter over. Now Sarah picks up the jug of water and tops up my glass. So the plan was to get Jerry onto the roof terrace, where Maddie would then throw herself off it and fall to her death, but make it look like Jerry was responsible, so framing him for her murder instead. Am I right? I nod. And the injury to her head, it was the bottle you left there. She was meant to scratch him, I say, to get his DNA underneath his fingernails. My idea was to put the bottle there for the police to find, along with the cigarette butts. To put him firmly on the rooftop, exactly. In case he tried to say afterwards that they'd tussle somewhere else in the building, that he'd never been on the roof with her, that he had nothing to do with the fall. Sarah looks at me. She broke the bottle and hit herself with it. Is that what you're saying? She must have done, to make the attack look realistic, as serious as she could. That's a big thing to do, she frowns. Sarah frowns. To hit yourself over the head with a broken bottle. I agree, I say, but there was a lot at stake. I pick up the empty peanut packet and begun to fold the foil into the concertina against the tabletop. Sarah watches me. I'm aware that she's thinking it through, step by step. There'd been a post-mortem, an inquest even. Maddie's tumour would show up in her brain scan. Jerry's defence team would get disclosure of the medical record. Tumour would support Jerry's prospective defence. His defence would be the truth, of course, that Maddie had known she was dying, and, realising that her death was likely to be drawn out and unpleasant, she already had a good reason for wanting to bring her life to an early end. She killed herself and found me. Might be a ludicrous defence in any other circumstances, but the presence of the tumour might well persuade the police or the Crown Prosecution Service or a jury to accept this explanation, that Maddie had decided to take him down with her, that she had entrapped him by luring him to the building and throwing herself off. Of course, if this were his defence, then he'd have ascribed a motive to Maddie. He'd have to admit that she discovered his unhealthy sexual interests in her teenager, and there would be plenty of evidence of that on Emily's phone. But given a choice between a couple years of grooming or a life sentence for murder, he'd taken the former, right? It would be a case of damage elimination. He'd be out of prison before too long. Meanwhile, the police might go looking for Maddie's co-conspirators. Our plan could fail or go horribly wrong. Unless I glance up at Sarah and watch as her eyes widen with recognition. She's there. She's thinking what we had begun thinking. What if he believed he'd got away with it? With everything, after all, a conviction for a sex offence would put him on the sex offenders register. Everyone would know him as a paedophile. He'd get his head kicked in prison, his wife would leave him, his daughter would shun him, the police would have one eye on him and his whereabouts forever after. His life would be a shipwreck. Not quite the shipwreck that we wanted for him, but he'd want to avoid being caught if he could. So, if that opportunity presented itself, what could he do? What would anyone do in this situation, if they could? Sarah picks up her glass and looks at me as she lifts into her lips. Go on. Around me, the hotel staff are laying tables for dinner. A waiter is hoovering nearby. A smile acknowledges him, and he steps forward. Good evening. Will you be eating, ladies? He asks us. I turn to Sarah. I could eat something, she admits. We could share some starters, maybe? Good idea, I agree. The waiter brings over menus, and we order some more wine and the sharing platter of bread, olives, cheese and seafood. I wonder briefly whether Thurm will come down, ask what we've been discussing, and insist on joining us. If that happens, I'll have to make something up. But I'm getting pretty good at that. Break off a piece of bread. Sarah's looking at me, waiting. Do you remember what you told me about getting caught out in a lie? I ask. She nods. You said that's when they start to build a case against you. That's when you've lied to the police. It casts a doubt on everything else you say. It's the worst thing you can do, Sarah agrees. You're better off saying nothing at all. But that can't hurt you. That can't hurt you too, right? It can do, yes, but the police like it better when you trip yourself up. They like to lull you into false sense of security to get you talking about how they ordered to do that. Oh, sorry. They hold certain things back. They let you dig and escape a hole for yourself, I say. One that they can later push you into. Exactly. And then, when it's big enough to bury you in, there's no need for me to finish that sentence. She looks at me for a long, thoughtful moment. Wasn't it terribly risky, though? She finally asks. What you did? Yes, I say it was. Why then? Why put yourself in the building, or on the roof? We needed to divert their attention away from Jerry. But why destroy the CCTV? One thing that could have proved your innocence. We couldn't let the police see it. We had to give Jerry a chance to escape. So Dan did destroy it. No, I jump in quickly. He just pitched up at the right moment and discovered it had been accidentally deleted. I nod. I open my mouth to speak, but I close it again. Sarah picks up her napkin and wipes the corner of her mouth. And then there's the other tech stuff, she muses. The phone hacking, the security system, Maddie knowing how to get in the past cameras without seeing without the security guard seeing them. Jerry told her how. Sarah's eyes travelled to meet mine. But this was such a massive and horrid decision for Maddie, and you're really telling me that she did all this, plotted all this with you and Helen without telling her husband a thing. She loved him, right? Of course she did. And yet she left the house and jumped to her death without him knowing it was going to happen, without saying a proper goodbye. She had to, I insist. If she told him, he wouldn't let her go through with it. She knew that. He'd confront Jerry, beat the crap out of him. It'd ruin everything. And besides, she didn't want to make him an accomplice too, to what we did. She couldn't involve him. He had to stay clean, in the clear, for Emily. He's all she has. Sarah eyes me. So Maddie hit herself over the head with the wine bottle that Jerry had been drinking out of. I nod. Then, concussed no doubt, and bleeding profusely, she picked herself up off the ground and threw herself over the edge. I wince at Sarah's words, but nod again. Sarah falls silent for a moment. So how did she get past the security? I shrug. Like I said, she went in through the underground car park entrance and avoided the lift, and bypassed every single camera. We put cover over the lenses. Who did that? Sarah persists. Who put cover over the lenses? I gaze back at her. We knew what we were doing. We researched it. We worked it all out. And Kevin, from the security, didn't notice that someone was putting covers over the lenses? Like I said, he wasn't particularly vigilant. But what if he had been? You'd have to get to the camera without being seen in the first place. So what if he'd seen you and gone up to investigate? He didn't know. But you couldn't be sure he wouldn't, could you? I shake my head, reluctantly, uneasily. Her eyes cloud with doubt. And the time on the hard drive, who reset it, or was that just luck too? Lots of mistakes can happen with CCTV, I tell her, sidestepping her question. It often has the time and date set wrong and goes on a loop, and it gets overwritten before it's retrieved. I hesitated, then conceded. I guess it was luck, though. She gives me a look that tells me I've been rumbled. There's no point in pretending any longer. You told me you can't tell anyone else what I've told you and it is confidential, I say quickly. She nods. That's right. Even if they're not your client? Not unless you tell me to. I take a deep breath. There was someone else there. There was someone else there that night, I say slowly. But I need to know for sure that they can't be arrested. I can't let that happen. I let my hands drop into the table. It's someone who... I hesitate. Who has a bright future ahead of them. If I told someone about this person and this person got arrested, they'd tell the truth and then the police would find out about you too, right? I nod anxiously. So I can't tell anyone about them. How can I? I have to act in your best interests at all times. I met her eyes. Are you sure? Yes, she says firmly, I'm sure. I exhale with relief. I'm sorry. Everything I've told you is true, except that Haley was the one who reset the time on the CCTV and turned off all the downstairs cameras. Haley? I can see the surprise in Sarah's eyes. I nod. She'd worked for Dan for 12 years. She knew pretty much everything he knew about the building, about the security systems. You're telling me that Haley was in on it. She hesitated. All of it. I look back at Sarah in silence, knowing that whatever I say next could, in the wrong hands, have the direst of consequences. But I want to tell her the truth now, the whole truth. She was sharp. She switched on. I can tell by the questions she was asking, but if there's anything we overlooked, she'll see it. It's the questions that's been playing on my mind since the day the police arrested me. Are we really going to pull this off? Chapter 46. 6 months earlier. I stood in Dan's office. still clutching hot mugs of coffee, holding them steady so that I didn't splash any liquid onto the thick, plush carpet under my feet. My throat tightened as I got a better look of the photograph on his desk. Maddie, all lit up and laughing, leaning in lovingly towards her beautiful daughter. And in a crashing, bruising moment, as I recall the conversation I had with Maddie in her bedroom the previous day, it came to me. What if Jerry Seeger was the older man Emily had been seeing? What if Jerry Seeger had been grooming Emily for sex, just as he groomed Emily and me? I made myself breathe deeply and evenly for a moment, then turned and slipped out of her room. For a split second, I noticed Haley watching me, but she quickly averted her eyes and tilted her head back towards the computer. I walked over and placed her coffee mug on her desk. She thanked me without looking up, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on her computer screen. Do you know where Dan is? I asked her, as casually as I could. I lifted my own mug and peered over her rim. He's working from home today. I took a mouthful of coffee. I need him to sign something. Have you got his mobile number? Sorry, I'm not allowed to give it out, she said, looking straight ahead of the screen. What do you need signed? Oh, just my timesheet for the agency. I can sign those. Can you? Yeah, no problem. Okay, I said, I'll dig it out. Are you okay? She asked me, after yesterday, but her voice was flat and unfriendly, and she was still gazing ahead at a screen as she spoke. Yeah, I said, I think it was just the heat. Should you be here? Again, unfriendly, no eye contact. Did she know that I was lying to her? I'm okay, I murmured. The ambulance was just a precaution. They said my blood pressure was low and I do faint sometimes. It happens before. She turned so that her head was now towards me. She clearly wanted us to finish the conversation and for me to go away. Haley, I began, intending to just come out of it with make up some excuse from hiding in Dan's garden. She hesitated, then moved her chair very slightly back towards me. I waited until she lifted her head to look at me. It was only then I noticed her eyes were shimmering with tears. Haley, I said softly, are you okay? She bit her lip and nodded. What's wrong? She looked around the room for a second to make sure no one was watching. I can't talk, she shrugged back. Someone will see me. A tear leaked out of the corner of her eye and trickled down her cheek and into her mouth. She licked it anyway. I reached out, touched her arm. I'll meet you in the toilets, I whispered. I'll go now, wait a few minutes, and follow me, okay? She nodded, swallowing hard. I put my coffee mug down on her desk and walked away. Out through the glass door and into the corridor. I pushed open the door into the female toilets where I checked all 3 cubicles were empty, then leaned against a basin and waited. A few moments later, Haley entered. There's no one else here, I reassured her, and if anyone comes in, just go into a cubicle and wait until they've gone. She nodded, looking a little uncomfortable, but grateful too. What's happened, Haley? I asked her gently. Has someone upset you? Her eyes met mine and started sobbing, her shoulders shaking. I reached out and put my arms around her. Please, tell me what's happened, I said after a moment. You can talk to me, I promise. I won't breathe a word. It's Jerry, she sobbed. I felt myself stiffen. What about him? She pulled away and wiped her tears. He's just bawled me out in front of my client. I looked at her, aghast. What for? He thought I'd asked the secretaries to prioritise some of my typing over a report he'd told them was urgent. He summoned me up to the bar, where he was meeting his client, and yelled at me in front of everyone, including the bar staff. He totally got it wrong, but he didn't wait for me to explain. The bully, I said angry, showing off in front of the client. He's always doing it, I sobbed. Has he done it before? She nodded. He's always talking down to me. Is it just you? I asked, or is he like this with other people? She looked as if she was about to say something, then appeared to change her mind. She caught sight of herself in the mirror. Oh God, she wailed, look at me, I'm a wreck. Everyone's going to notice that I've been crying. They'll see the minute I walk back into the office. I shrugged. Don't go back then, let's go out. What? Where? It's nearly lunchtime anyway, I said. Dan's not here, and Jerry's in a meeting. I'll go back in, grab both of my bags, and make an excuse to Maria. No one will miss you, and Dan always calls your mobile, right? He'll be able to get hold of you if he needs you. She nodded slowly. Go down to the lobby where anyone sees you, I insisted. I won't be far behind. We'll get a coffee somewhere, okay? Haley agreed. So I poked my head out of the toilet, then walked across the corridor and called the lift. When it arrived, I ushered Haley inside. We'll meet you by the monument, I said as the door lid slid shut. I'll be 5 minutes behind you. I walked back into the office and over to my desk, where I pulled my bag over my shoulders and strode purposely across the room. No one appeared to be paying any attention to me. As I passed Dan's office, I stopped and sidled in. Then, realizing I left my phone on the desk drawer, quickly picked up the silver-framed photo of Maddie and Emily. My eyes had landed on the black leather desk diary. I picked that up too and slid both into my bag. Checking that the coast was clear, I slipped out of the room again, went back to my desk, and took my phone from the drawer. I then went over to Haley's desk, grabbed her bag, and pushed it underneath my own, calling to Maria that I was going to the hospital appointment and that I'd squared it with Haley, who had gone to run an errand for Dan before lunch. I met Haley by the monument, as arranged. We bought a coffee from Pret, then walked south towards London Bridge and down the steps to the Thames. We chose a bench on the roof and sat there, sipping our drinks and watching the boats glide through the sparkling sunlight water before disappearing into the shadow under the bridge. He tried to have sex with me, Haley said abruptly. I felt a shockwave through me. Jerry, she nodded. I placed my cup on the wall beside me. When? A few months ago, she sniffed. I mean, he'd been making dirty comments to me in the office parties for years. But he did that to everyone. Maria told me that he once said something really crude to her about the wine bottle he was holding and where he wanted to put it. She saw my face. Disgusting, right? But everyone just put it down to him getting out of control when he had too much to drink. I never let it bother me. I mean, we're in a male-dominant industry. Even in this day and age, you hear about the kind of behaviour all the time, but I never expected. She swallowed. What? I pressed her. He began stopping at my desk to talk to me, complimenting me on my hair or what I was wearing. Then he started asking me personal questions about my sex life, which I really didn't like, but I didn't feel confident enough to tell anyone, or tell him to stop. I mean, he's the CEO of the bank. He could fire me in an instant, so I mostly managed to ignore it. But then one day after work, she waited and looked down at her coffee cup, and I could see her hand was shaking. I reached out and took the cup from her, placing it on the wall next to mine. We waited until everyone had left, she continued. I was the last one there, or I thought I was. I had some contracts I had to finish for Dan. When he came out, I was surprised to see him. Next thing I know, he's calling me into his office, asking me to sit down on his sofa, and then he said that I was wasting my talents working for Dan. He said he wanted me to be his PA. It would be a big promotion. I'd have to work hard, go on business trips with him and work long hours, he said, but he could see that I had what it took to go all the way. So what did you say? I didn't want to work for him. My mouth set a hard line. I knew what he wanted. I knew what he meant when he said all the way. So I just said that I was happy working for Dan. And then she closed her eyes, took a breath. Then he locked the door and turned down the blinds. He came over to where I was sitting and sat down next to me and put his hand on my shoulder and reached up and took it off. And then he got angry and told me I'd been leading him on. I continued to look at her aghast. What did he do to you, Haley? She started to sob again. He said, I've given you a lot of breaks here, given you a lot of opportunities. I think you owe me. I mean, understanding each other here, Haley. And he moved his hands down and put it on mine. Oh, why? She stuttered. On my breast. He squeezed it. Touched her hand. It's okay. I said, it's okay. So I pulled his hands off and I got up on the sofa. He got up too and put his arms around me. So I pushed him off and then he came up at me again, so I slapped him. He didn't like that. She shook her head, trying to get rid of the memory. He got really angry. He grabbed hold of me and pushed me up against the desk. Oh God, Haley, he didn't. She stifled a sob. I thought he was going to, but he stopped. She turned her eyes to meet mine, tears running down her cheeks. He let go of me and told me to fuck off out of his room. He was leaning over me, and spit came out of his mouth as he said it. He was close. He was so close that it landed on my face. My legs had turned to jelly, but I somehow managed to get to the door and unlock it. And then he looked across at me, and he waited that it was too early in my career to start making waves. I told him I didn't understand, and he said, "Oh, I think you do." And then he said, "Shut the door on your way out." So I did. I ran up the office and all the way to the tube station, and I got the tube, and then I ran from the tube station all the way home. I shook my head. "And you've never told anyone this?" "You heard what he said to me, Tate. Has anything happened since?" She shook her head. "He mostly ignores me. He makes a point of talking to other people as if I'm not even there. Sometimes he makes sarcastic comments and talks down to me. Occasionally he shouts at me, like today. It's obvious to everyone in the office that he doesn't like me, but no one knows the real reason. He badmouths me to people and makes out that it tells people that I'm lazy and stupid. I thought about leaving, but no." I said, "Why should you?" She shrugged. "I'm ready for a career move, to be honest. I've worked for Dan for 12 years, and I've learned a lot, but I'm keen to move out of the PA work and into IT. You'd be so good at that," I told her enthusiastically. "You're really good at all that tech stuff. Why don't you just do it?" She exhaled deeply. "Jerry's the one who's allowed to give out references, and I'm scared that if I go somewhere new, he'd do something that mess things up for me." "Really think he would?" I, I don't doubt for a moment," she said. "One of the secret secretaries who used to work here told me that he takes it very personally when anyone leaves the bank." I studied her face for a moment and turned to look up at the flock of gulls that had been wheeling around in my eye line. Eventually setting on the surface of the water, I thought about everything Haley had just told me, and about the hunch I'd had when I was standing in Dad's office. I didn't know for sure that he had harmed Maddie's daughter, but I'd been right about one thing: Jerry was a predator. What kind of words was it that would cut short the life of someone good like Maddie, and yet allow someone like him to go living the life he wanted? So go on doing what he wanted, taking what he wanted. "Haley," I began. I stopped, thinking about how much I was able to tell her. I shifted around the bench so that I was sitting square to her. "Haley," I said, "I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you." She blinked. "Is it anything to do with you being in Dan's garden last night?" "In a way, yes," I answered truthfully, relieved that now that was at the open. "But that's something I can't talk about at the moment. I hope you can just take my word for it that I have very good reason for being there." She hesitated, looking puzzled for a moment, then faked a smile. "It's none of my business, is it?" "It's not what you think," I reassured her. "I made a promise to someone that I had, and I have to keep it. But what you told me about Jerry, well, you're not the only one, Haley. He did it to me too. Only he did manage to have sex with me." Her mouth fell open. "Are you serious?" I nodded. "When?" "When I was 14. He did it to me. He did it to my friend Helen too." She looked first horrified, then puzzled. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You were 14, so he raped you?" I shook my head. "It wasn't rape. It was underage sex. But there's a law, and we're now out of time prospect for him for what he did to us." Her eyes sparkled with rage. "But you were children." I nodded. So is that why you're here? Did you get the job at the bank on purpose?" I nodded again. "The police wouldn't do anything about what he did to us. It was too long ago, and so I wanted to find him, and—" She eyed me up. "And what?" I told her about my plan. My initial plan to destroy his life, to tell his wife and daughter, to stand up in a meeting and tell all his staff and colleagues exactly who he was and what he'd done. But then I started having doubts about my ability to pull it off. I hadn't made any friends at the bank, what if no one believed me? Meanwhile, I'd begun to suspect that Helen and I weren't his only victims. I just needed some evidence. I told Ailey, and then he could still be prosecuted. It only took one person to make a complaint against him, I said, for other young women and girls to come forward. That's how it often happened, I said. If one woman was brave enough, others might speak up. There was strength in numbers, I reminded her, and I was convinced that there were going to be others. I didn't mention Emily to Haley at this point because I couldn't prove it yet. I also knew that Maddie should be the person I talked to first. But, like Maddie, Haley feared the repercussions. It was her word against Jerry's, she said. You hadn't raped her, had he? She had no physical evidence, and even if a jury believed her word, would get round. She had been viewed across the city as an upstart, a troublemaker, a biter, an man-hater. Jerry was right. No one would want to employ her. It would be the end of her career. What could I say? So we left it there. I promised to keep Haley's secret, as I promised to keep Maddie's. Haley touched up her puffy eyes with concealer and went back to the office, and even though she knew that there was nothing wrong with my heart, and that the hospital appointments were a front for something else that I was top up to, she signed my timesheet and took the rest of the afternoon off. I took the photograph of Emily down the St. Mary's Academy. I followed her home, and for 2 weeks Helen and I kept her under surveillance until we had the evidence we needed, which we then took to Maddie, who, as before long, came up with her plan. But I wasn't lying when I said that Haley had been watching my every move. I could tell she was curious about what I was doing when I wasn't in the office. She knew it had something to do with me hiding in Dan's garden, and she suspected that it also had something to do with the diary and the photograph of his wife and daughter that Dan had mentioned to her that were missing from his desk. And all the while she was getting angry as Maddie and Helen and I were about what Jerry was getting away with. As I said to Helen, once you know it, can't unknow it. The spark that had been lit inside us had been lit inside her too. Chapter 47. It was lunchtime on the Saturday of the weekend that Dan was away in Paris. We were sitting round the kitchen table at Maddie's, writing, when there was a knock at the front door. We looked at each other in silence. Emily had phoned just an hour ago to ask if she could stay another night at Rosie's, and Dan wasn't due back until the following day. Maddie got up and went to answer. When she returned, Haley was with her. As she came into the kitchen, Haley looked momentarily taken aback at the sight of me and Helen. She stood there for a moment, her eyes flickering back and forth between us, the three witches, and then she said, I'm sorry to interrupt. Maddie smiled. Don't be silly. Would you like a cup of tea? Or coffee? A flush crept up Haley's neck as she hovered awkwardly in the doorway. She told Maddie that she was fine, thank you, then after a moment hesitation looked across the table at me. Can we talk? She asked. I got up out my seat, and Maddie opened the patio door to the garden so that Haley and I could step outside. She closed it behind us. The garden furniture had been tucked away, and so we stood on the patio and looked out into the garden at the blanket of a red, green, and golden apples spread across the grass. As I watched the crows pecking away, unperturbed by our presence, Haley glanced back over her shoulder through the glass. Maddie looks very thin, she said, and tired. Yes, I agreed. And is that your friend? Yes, I said, that's Helen. She continued to observe Helen and Maddie through the glass, noticing, no doubt, how well equipped they seemed. After a moment, she turned round to face me. I came here to tell Maddie something, she said. Something I just can't stop thinking about, but maybe. Go on, I prompted her. She lifted her eyes to meet mine. Maybe she already knows. I waited. Her eyes swam with tears. I couldn't stop thinking about what he did to you, Tate. You were 14. 14! She shuddered. I haven't even kissed a boy when I was still 14. My parents were strict. I still, so naive, so protective. I barely stopped playing with dolls at 14. I just couldn't get it out of my head that he had sex with you, with both of you, when you were the same age I was then. And then I started to question everything. Everything I've heard him say, everything I've seen him do. I started to think about him liking young girls and whether I'd seen anything, whether he might have hurt anyone that. She shook her head. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and then I remembered. I saw him with Emily. She paused. You know, Maddie and Dan's daughter. I drew a breath. What did you see? She came into the office a few months ago. Dan wasn't there, and she knocked on the door of Jerry's office, and he asked her in, and I remember seeing them sitting there together. They seemed very familiar with each other, in a way that made me uncomfortable, I guess. She had her feet up on the sofa and was wearing her school uniform. Her skirt was short and her legs were bare, and I remember noticing the way they were looking at each other and laughing. It was too friendly, if you know what I mean. I know what you mean. I didn't think about it enough to realise, she continued, a flush creeping up her neck. Not there and then. I knew that Jerry and Dan saw each other out of work and that their families had dinner together now and again. So Emily knew him, and so I suppose I didn't think too much of it. It was only after you told me what he did to you that it hit me, and now I feel so guilty for just ignoring it, for not saying anything. You shouldn't feel guilty, I said. She squeezed her eyes shut. Believe me, she continued, I've really, really struggled with this, but Dad's in Paris with Jerry, and I felt we couldn't wait. I felt I had to talk to Maddie. It's okay, I told her. She already knows. Hayley slowly shook her head. So it's true, then? We think so, I said, but we can't prove it. So Maddie hasn't spoken to Emily about it? No. Tears welled up in Hayley's eyes. I feel so bad. Why do you feel bad? I objected. For being a coward. For not going to the police. For not doing anything. Hayley, you're not a coward, I protest. He's a powerful man. He's an evil, sick bastard, she said angrily, tears running down her neck. That's what he is. I know, I agreed, putting an arm round her and giving her a hug. I know. Hayley looked through the window at Helen and Maddie, who were watching us. Is Emily here? I shook my head. No. Hayley wiped her eyes. Whatever it is you're doing, I want to help. Hayley, it's fine, I said. We're just talking it through at the moment. Then let me talk through it with you. Look, Maddie doesn't think Emily will tell the truth, Hayley interrupted, does she? And without Emily, there's no case. She doesn't think she can do it. She'd do anything about it. I nodded. That's pretty much where we've got to. Let me help. I fell silent, thinking. Our plan was in the early stages. We hadn't yet had a chance to work it all through. What we were planning was huge, and it was illegal, and the risk was enormous. We needed to keep our circle of trust as tight as we possibly could. On the other hand, Hayley already knew plenty. She knew about Emily and about Jerry. She knew that we all had a grudge against him. If we went ahead without her, if Maddie died and Jerry got the blame, it wouldn't take Hayley long to work out what really happened. And then what? Would she tell anyone her suspicions? She might hate Jerry, and she might be glad to see him locked up, but she might not agree what we'd done. There was only one way of knowing what for sure, and that was to tell her our plan. I'd have to run all this by Maddie and Helen, of course. We'd only been writing our stories since the previous evening. There were plot holes, multiple plot holes. There were many, many issues we still hadn't had a chance to address. If we told Hayley what we were doing, we could gauge her reaction. If she didn't like it, we would have to abandon it. It was as simple as that. But if Hayley could be convinced, if she was on board, she would have a unique perspective. She knew the CPF office, she knew the entire building, she had a wealth of knowledge that none of the rest of us had. In fact, she'd only been this week mentioned to me that Dan had been having issues with the security guys, which could prove really useful, without a doubt. She knew things that none of the rest of us did. Whatever you're planning, I can help. Hayley's voice cut into my thoughts. She clenched her jaw and whispered, You're right, I'm not a coward. What is it you're thinking we're planning? She narrowed her eyes. I don't know. Maybe it's the best that you don't. Maybe it's the best I do, she said. Just because I don't want to go to court doesn't mean I'm a coward, Tate. This was the second time she'd said this, and it made me wonder about it. So I asked her if she'd mind going down to Tesco Express Union and buying us some sandwiches while I consult Maddie and Helen. She agreed eagerly, refusing our money. You don't know me very well, Tate, but I'm quite creative. You may be surprised, as she said as she left. I smiled, and I said that if there was no cheese and onion, then she's welcome to surprise me. And she gave me a look that said, "Please don't tease me. Please don't tease me. Please take me seriously." And then she walked down the front path, past the bushes I'd hidden in and out onto the street. But we were surprised. Hayley was more than creative. She was brilliant. It was her idea to tell the police that she'd seen me lurking in Dan and Maddie's garden and about the missing diary and photograph. It was her idea to make up an additional story to tell the police that she had seen me slouched down in my car outside the restaurant in Soho on the day that Dan had left for Paris. It was her idea to tell them that she often caught me watching him. It was Hayley who invited me with the other secretaries to the bar in the late November, where we could watch and take notes on everything that Jerry did, smoked, or drank. And it was Hayley who voted to take on the one remaining role that neither Helen nor I could have managed. In fact, the plan couldn't have worked without her. Hayley Albright is definitely no coward. She's one of the bravest people I've ever known. Chapter 48. Saturday, the 10th of December. I woke up early that morning, unable to fall back to sleep as I'd remembered what day it was. It was still dark outside, so I got back into bed, the mug of tea and my laptop. I pulled up the website for St. Corinthian Docks. I clicked on the What's On page to make sure that the dockside party was still going ahead that evening, the one that Helen was meant to be going to. The same announcement was there. There will be a fabulous selection of festival treats and drinks on offer, including mince pies, mulled wine, and hot chocolate. Guests can look forward to all the warmth and good cheer of the Christmas evening. Tickets cost £30 plus booking fee, and all still available to buy by clicking the link below. The photos were inciting, happy, smiling people mingling, their faces lit up by the glow of the lights that were strung along the Moria and across the water. The doors of the 18th century dockside pubs were open and welcoming in the back garden, inviting you to step inside and enjoy the warmth of the cosy open fire. It sounded like fun, the kind of party I'd like to go to if there were an ordinary Saturday in mid-December. The thought of a party going on this normal, carefree, parallel universe was suddenly hard to think about. I pushed my laptop aside and lay back against the pillow, closing my eyes and taking a few long, deep breaths. There was no going back now. From the outset, Maddie had been clear that this was what she wanted, and there was no way in the world I was going to let her down. I finally dozed for what must have been half hour or so. When I opened my eyes again, it was light outside. I felt my stomach flutter as I got out of bed, dressed in jeans and a thick sweater, and went out to check the car. It was a cold, bright winter morning, and there was a thin layer of ice over the windows. I scraped it off, screwing up my eyes against the piercing white sky, then got in, started the engine, running it for a bit. When I got back inside, Helen was in the kitchen with a bag of Danish pastries. Car's good, running just fine, I smiled, kicking off my trainers and standing in the doorway. We looked at each other for a long, strange moment. Then Helen heaved into a sigh, and we wrapped our arms around each other and held each other tight. "This is it, Hel," I whispered in her ear. "I'm so nervous." It's good to be nervous," I told her. "Not too nervous, obviously. Not stage fright nervous. But the day I stopped getting nervous is the day I stopped acting." Helen picked up the pastries, followed me into the living room, putting them on the plate on the coffee table. I helped myself to one and ate it while I was doing some stretches and lunges. The air had woken me up. I suddenly had lots of pent-up energy. Helen sat me in the armchair and curled her legs up underneath her. You know what's making me nervous? She said. You. I'm just warming up, that's all, I told her. I mean, what you said to Jerry, I can't believe you called him a prick. I grinned. You should have seen his face. Really? I mimicked. Helen stiffed a smile and shook her head. You do like playing with fire with tea. He didn't remember me. I stopped lunging and snacked down on the sofa. I know, but if it hits him later, well, good, I said. I want him to realise who's done this. No, you don't, she said. I shrugged. What could he do? He'd have to admit what he'd done to us. He's hardly going to do that. She shot me a warning glance. Just be careful. Stick to the script. No more ad-libbing, okay? The day passed slowly. Helen and I spent it in the exact same spot in my living room, eating cribs and half watching an old Hitchcock thriller whilst exchanging messages with Haley and Maddie on the old black Nokias that Haley had picked up for us on the phone shop near Street Front. Prepaid, no contract, paid with cash, can't be traced. She told us simply. All was going well, it seemed. There had been an incident between Emily and Dan just before he left the office that had resulted in Emily being grounded and her phone confiscated, following which it had been lost. Maddie had it safely in her possession. She would start sending them messages soon. At 4 o'clock, Helen went upstairs to get dressed, then came back down again. Looking lovely in her red coat and killer heels, we waited. By 5, it was pitch black outside the window. It felt like a million years since the crisp, bright morning I'd woken up to. At 5:30, I typed a message to Maddie. Hey, how's it going? All good. I think I've caught him, came her reply, and my stomach flipped. She said she'd got back to me in a minute. I sat as still as a statue, my knees drawn up against my chest, my head resting on my forearms, while Helen sat equally still in the chair opposite. A few moments later, the phone bleeped, and I grabbed it from the coffee table. It was Haley. Okay, we've got him. Time to go. It's time, I breathed, looking across at Helen. She immediately leaped into action. Picking up the car keys from the basket on the table, she gave me a hug and left the flat. I got up shakily and opened a tin of Sheba for George. They got my bag and my coat ready. It would take Helen 15 minutes at most to drive to Kendrick Place at this time on a Saturday, and then another 5 to park and call a taxi to bring her back. 25 minutes after she left, my phone rang. My real phone. I answered. Hello, Tate, Helen said, speaking rapidly, her voice unsteady. I'm really sorry about this, but I need to get to the point. I've lost an earring. I've looked everywhere, but I can't find it. It must have fallen out of my ear last night. Oh no, I said. Were they expensive? They're diamonds, she exclaimed. They're precious, unique, and irreplaceable. They were the last thing my gran gave me before she died. She paused, then I heard a sob. They're all I have left of her. I have to find it. I have to get it back. I smiled. Her acting was good. She sounded really upset. We said the rest of our lines and then went downstairs, and there was the cab, idling outside the building with Helen in the back. I got in next to her and gave the driver the office address. As we headed through Mayfair, I told her all the stuff about how we should warn security that we were coming, and she begged me not to, and then she told me how she'd got fired from Cohen Macaulay, and that if we found the earring, she was going to buy me a very large drink. All the while, we made sure the taxi driver could hear us. I squeezed her hand. I was proud of her, and I knew she was right. There should be no ad-libbing. This would all go to plan if everyone stuck to the script. Chapter 49. Up on the roof terrace, it was cold and dark. The single motion sensor emergency lights having cut out several minutes ago. Where are you? His message frantic. On the roof. Are you kidding me? What are you doing up there? The view is amazing. It's such a long way down. Em, you need to come down from there. Haley looked up at Maddie. They were reading and typing the messages together. Huddled up close in the cold, hard gravel behind the skylight, the screen of Emily's Samson lit up the darkness. Let's leave it there. He'll be worried now, Haley said. He'll come up to find you. Maddie nodded, breathed in deeply for a moment, then pulled Dan's coat tightly around her, zipped it up, and drew a snood up around her throat and chin. It's not too late to change your mind, Haley said softly. We've got the messages now. We can confront him together, call the police. Maddie shook her head. Messages aren't enough. I know, Haley said, her voice trembling with emotion. I just need to know 100% certain that this is what you want. I'm certain, Maddie whispered, then smiled up at Haley, and extremely grateful. Me too. Haley wiped a tear from her eye. I'm so glad I have known you, Maddie. I'm so glad I have known you too. Maddie smiled weakly, then powered the Samson off and held it out to Haley, who opened up her rucksack pocket. Maddie dropped the phone inside and Haley zipped up. Maddie pulled her hood around her face, then stood up shakingly and stepped out from behind the skylight. A gust of wind blew hard and Haley saw Maddie struggle a little to regain her footing. A second gust of wind blew her hood back, and she had to grab hold of it and pull it forward. As she secured it tightly, she turned to face Haley for a brief moment. She then walked round the corner, out of sight. They waited in silence, Haley shrinking down into the shadows as far of the skylight. Finally, Haley heard the metal door to the fire escape open and the security light blinked on. M, his voice. There you are. What the hell are you playing at? Come away from the edge. A pause. Footsteps. Jesus, M, he said. You have had me right. What's going on? Haley was incensed. The casual, familiar way that bastard spoke Emily's name, and as the scent caught the breeze of the wafted across the rooftop towards her, was that aftershave. Was he wearing aftershave from 50 for a 15-year-old girl? The smell of it, combined with the nervous tension that was already gnawing at her stomach, made her want to retch. She inhaled deeply and held her breath for a few seconds, and then she heard it. Maddie was launching herself at him. You bastard! You filthy, disgusting bastard! She screamed. His neck, Maddie! Haley pleaded silently. Remember, his marks on his neck, just his neck. There was a sound of wrestling, and Jerry's voice yelling out in shock and surprise. What the fuck are you doing? Get off me, you crazy bitch! Haley heard a heavy thud as they landed against the skylight. She clenched her fists, dug her fingernails into her palms, raging, yawning to run out there and help her friend. As they moved, the security light blinked off, then on again. You bitch, Jerry snarled. I'm bleeding. My daughter, Maddie sobbed. How dare you prey on my daughter? How dare you use me and Dan to get to her, you sick fuck? You're a fucking psycho, Jerry countered. I don't know what you think you know, but I was concerned about Em. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. If you were a better parent, liar, Maddie yelled. You came here to have sex with my daughter. Don't be ridiculous, he spat. You've known her since she was a baby, Maddie cried. We trusted you. You were like an uncle to her. Did you touch her then? When she was a baby, a toddler? I mean, where do you draw the line, Jerry? How young do you actually like them? You're off your head, do you know that? What? Maddie said, between clenched teeth. What have you been doing with my daughter? I haven't done anything to your daughter, he snarled. You're a fucking lunatic. I don't know how Dan puts up with you, but there's a tremor in his voice that Haley knew revealed more than anger. Behind his rage was a layer of fear. You fucking bastard, Maddie cried, launching herself at him again. There was one more thud again, and the skylight as he pushed her sharply backwards. Then Haley could hear him striding away. I'm out of here, he called to her, shakingly. And he crossed the roof terrace towards the fire escape. And he better get out of here too before I call security. The metal door creaked open and swung shut again. Haley let out a breath. Jerry wouldn't call security. He'd be running scared. He'd want to get out of the building without being seen. He'd be wondering exactly what Maddie knew, what she could prove, trying to remember if he said anything truly incriminating in any way of those messages to Emily. He'd be wondering if Dan knew about the messages, if Emily knew that they knew, and if so, what she told him. He was wondering why Maddie alone had confronted him on the roof of his office, of all places, instead of knocking his front door down and calling the police. He'd figured it out soon enough, of course. But whatever Jerry did or didn't do, they needed to act quickly. Haley waited until Maddie stepped round to the side of the skylight, where she was crouching in the darkness. They were sure Jerry had gone. Maddie moved over to the wall, reached down and pulled the wine bottle from the gap between the wall and skylight. She handed it to Haley, who took it in the gloved hand. Haley hesitated. Maddie nodded. Still, Haley waited, wanted to be sure. She stifled to stop. Please, Maddie said gently, you have to do this for me, for Emily. Haley nodded and swallowed, pushed her courage into reserve, then in one full swing movement raised her arm and broke the bottle against the skylight. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, and they moved together to the edge of the building, scrambled in the skylight and onto the wall. The bottle struck Maddie's cranium and the left side head above the ear. She began to sink down, to slip. Maddie threw the bottleneck down and mended the splintered shards, and quickly took hold of Maddie, lifting her, supporting her, and finally levering her so that she was bent. She was bent double over the railing. Maddie took a deep breath, her heart breaking into throat and pieces as she rocked Maddie gently forward and watched her go. Chapter 50. Chapter 50. I heard her hit the ground. From the shop doorway I'd chosen as my lookout behind the building, or maybe I heard nothing. Maybe my mind was embellished its sense in the same way that it had persisted in taking me to the edge of the roof terrace, as if I'd been there when it happened, looking down. Maybe my brain is still trying to join the dots, to make sense of the fact that by the time I saw her text the living, breathing woman I'd known as Maddie, the woman I'd spoken to just a short while ago, when she called me to the rooftop, was now nothing more than a broken body slump on the pavement, with misshapen legs and a missing shoe. Her landing was an eerie, shocking thump, followed closely by a single scream, some frantic shouting and slamming of car doors. Helen told me later that she heard it too, from the lobby inside the building where she was standing by the desk with Kevin from security, getting directions to St. Catherine's Docks. Even though she'd known it was about to happen, the shock had been more than she could have imagined, but said in her reaction was natural and unscripted. Once outside, she messaged and confirmed that what I already knew to be true. She's on the ground. A message said, Kevin's outside, no signs of Elvis. At the rear of the building, my fingers trembling, I typed, "Nor here. Are you okay?" A single word came back from the rooftop. Yes. Yes, typed Helen. You? Yes. I waited and watched the exit. Finally, I saw him. He pulled his coat over his head and striding up the slope of the underground car park, looking around him in all directions as he came out onto the street and walked quickly away. Elvis has left the building, I typed into the Nokia. Greystone Way, heading for Turn Again Lane. I pressed send. Still out front with Kevin. Lots of people now, Helen replied. Security from other buildings are all out here. Okay, coming down, said Haley. I stepped out of the hideout behind a stack of cardboard and followed Jerry out at the distance, knowing it won't be long before he realized that something had happened to adjacent street. I could already see that there was a stream of traffic queuing up Turn Again Lane. At the junction, he turned left down the lane. I ran to catch him up. Meanwhile, he'd reached the junction with Eastcheap and had stopped. He stood still for a moment, staring in the direction of the office and scratching his head, then turned and walked quickly back up the lane again. I leaped into the shop doorway. When I looked out, he'd turned left and was heading away from me, towards Monument. I waited for several moments later until I couldn't see him any more, then walked back down to Grainstone Way, going round into the Eastcheap in the opposite direction. As I rounded the corner into the street, my heart hammered in my chest and my knees grew weak in anticipation of what awaited me. My eyes were immediately drawn to the scene on the pavement in front of the building, where the protective layer of security guards stood around Maddie's body to keep the crowd that had gathered. People were milling around in the roof and on the pavement, standing talking in small groups, expression of shock and disbelief on their faces. One or two people had their phones out to my disgust, while holding them up in the air. Shakily, I circuited the crowd, crossing the roads and walking over to the opposite pavement. I looked towards the entrance of the office building, searching for Helen, but I couldn't see her. Seconds later, she appeared silently behind me and poked me in the back. I glanced briefly around me to check it was her, then pulled my Nokia out of my pocket. I felt her fingers take it away while I looked away. "Good luck," she said under the breath. "I'll see you later." I nodded and watched her as she weaved her way through the traffic and the people and headed east, disappearing from sight. I crossed the road towards where Maddie was lying, to where the security guards were standing. I could hear the siren of the police and ambulance vehicles in the near distance getting louder and louder. This was it. Then, this was my moment. I took a deep breath and began to push my way through. Chapter 51. Hayley quickly reached for Maddie's handbag and threw it over the railing after her. She then stepped carefully around the splintered glass to the other side of the skylight where she'd left her rucksack, desperately trying to shut out the memory of the thud she just heard and ensuing commotion from down below. Her phone bleeped twice. It was Helen. She was out front with Kevin from security. Hayley shook with grief when Helen said that she'd seen Maddie on the ground, but resisted the urge to ask any questions. "Are you okay?" came the next message. "Yes." A tear landed on Hayley's screen as she typed. She moved into the orbit of the emergency sensor to gain some light, then, still wearing her leather gloves, quickly removed her blood-soiled glass splintered clothes and shoes. It was bitterly cold, and Hayley shivered in her underwear as she pushed everything into a large grip-sealed plastic bag, and then took off her gloves, dropping it into the bag before zipping it up. She then pulled her clean clothes and shoes out onto the rucksack and put them on. As she did so, the Nokia bleeped twice. Elvis has left the building, Graystone Way, heading to Turnagain Lane. Then another text from Helen, still out front with Kevin, lots of people now, security from other buildings, all out here. "Okay," she typed back, "coming down." She pushed the grip-sealed bag into her rucksack, then slung it over her shoulder. She pulled up her hood and hurried through the emergency exit and down the fire escape. She then followed the corridor round the stairwell, where she descended rapidly, taking the steps 2 at a time. When she reached the ground floor, she propped open one of the double doors to the stairwell with her shoe, ran along the corridor, then dropped to her stomach and slid underneath the security turnstile. She crawled onto her hands and knees, skirting the desk from the rear. The lights were dimmed and the lobby was in shadow. She sneaked into the security office and slid into the chair behind the desk, then checked the central panel that controlled the revolving doors. Kevin had already locked them remotely. No one except Kevin would be able to come back in, and if all had gone to plan, he should now be fully occupied outside. Hayley tapped the keyboard in front of her, moved the mouse, slid the controller up and down until she found the part of the footage she wanted, then reached into the box that housed the hard drive to reset the time and the start footage recording again. She checked against time on the Nokia. As she did so, she looked at each camera, one by one, one each. On each, the hour was set at 1840. The real time now was 1940. The footage had begun to overwrite. Everything that happened in the hour since she and Maddie had arrived at the rear entrance should be wiped by the time the police came for the footage. She selected the cameras in the stairwell and lowered ground floor corridor, then switched it off, along with the camera that pointed to the exit of the car park at the rear. Crouching on the floor again, Haley crawled out onto the. Oh, God. Haley crawled out into the shadows of the darkened lobby. As she reached the desk, the sirens outside became deafening, and the lobby was flooded with blue lights. She bolted behind the desk and slid onto her stomach, head down, underneath the turnstile, then pushed herself up to her feet and sprinted along the corridors of the inner quadrant and out the stairwell, retrieving her shoe as she went. Once in the underground car park, she let herself out of the building with a Temp 1 security pass, pulled her hood, and ran. This is going to be the end of this section, because obviously the time. I hope you enjoy it, and wait for the next one.